The sand was still warm under his body. That was the strange part. CT-1477 had been alive 6 hours ago. He had eaten his first field ration on a gunship. He had heard the sound of battle for the first time. Not in a simulation, not through a helmet speaker in a training room. The real thing. He had looked at the trooper beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing that fit. Now he was face down on red rock. The sand was still warm from the sun, and no one was coming back for him. This is where the Clone Wars began. Not in a Senate chamber, not in a speech, not in a moment anyone chose clearly. It began here, in the dust of Geonosis, on a world that smelled like rust and heat, where a man with no name died before anyone thought to give him one. His designation was CT-1477. That was all the Republic needed from him. It was enough. 6 hours earlier, the gunships had dropped through Geonosis' amber sky like stones. Below them, the execution arena was already burning. Jedi had been fighting there, outnumbered, surrounded, buying minutes with their lives. Mace Windu stood at the center of it all, with a purple blade in his hand and a stillness in his face that looked like calm. It was not calm. It was the specific expression of a man who had accepted, in the last 30 seconds, that he might die here. Then the gunships arrived. Then the clones poured out, and the battle changed. The noise was something no one had heard before. Thousands of identical voices calling out coordinates. Thousands of identical bodies moving through smoke in identical armor. The Geonosians, insect-like, winged, fast, fell back. Not because they were outmatched, because nothing in their history had prepared them for this. An army that did not stop. An army that did not hesitate. An army that had been grown for this exact moment and had been alive, technically, for less than a decade. Obi-Wan Kenobi watched Anakin fight from across the arena floor. Anakin moved differently than he used to. Faster, less careful. There was something in the way he cut through the chaos. Not just skill, but will. Like he was not trying to survive the battle. Like he was trying to end it personally. Obi-Wan felt proud. Underneath the pride, without quite naming it, he felt afraid. He did not examine the fear. There was no time. There was never time. Count Dooku watched from a high balcony for a while. Then he left. This is worth noting. The man who had engineered this war, who had spent years building the Separatist alliance, recruiting systems, constructing the droid army, watched the opening battle of his own conflict for a few minutes, and then walked away. He was not fleeing. He was not defeated. He simply had somewhere else to be. The war was already running on its own now. It did not need him to watch. Master Yoda arrived at Geonosis with the clone army. The full, formal deployment. The gunships formed up. The ATTEs moved across the rocky terrain. The Grand Army of the Republic, as it would later be called, operated in the field for the first time. The Jedi Council had debated for years whether to involve the Order in military command. In the end, the debate did not matter. The war was here. The clones needed generals. The Jedi were the only ones the Republic trusted, so they became generals. In a single afternoon, without a ceremony, without a formal transition, without anyone sitting with the full weight of what that change actually meant for an order built on peace. Yoda felt it, standing on that battlefield, watching the clones move, watching the Jedi lead them. He felt something underneath the victory that he could not name cleanly. Not doubt. He had made the right call. He believed that. Something older than doubt, quieter, the Force, perhaps, registering what had just been set in motion. The way still water registers a stone, not with noise, but with a change in the surface that keeps spreading long after the stone is gone. Yoda watched and said nothing of what he felt. By late afternoon, the battle was over. The Separatist forces had retreated. Dooku had escaped. The Jedi who had survived the arena were standing, some of them bleeding, all of them tired, on a planet that smelled like hot rock and blaster residue. Mace Windu stood near the arena's edge. A reporter would later ask him what victory felt like. He did not answer that question. He answered a different one. Something about the Republic's resolve, about the importance of the Senate's response, about the strength of the Jedi's commitment. What he did not say, that he had stood in that arena expecting to die, that 21 Jedi had died beside him, that their names were already arranging themselves in his memory like a list he would carry for the rest of his life. He did not say any of that. The recorder was running. He said the right things instead. The clones did not celebrate. This is something the HoloNet coverage missed entirely. While the Republic's cameras framed Jedi Masters against the sunset and broadcast the first victory of the Clone Wars to a grateful galaxy, the clones processed. They counted casualties. They catalogued equipment. They moved the dead to designated collection points with the same efficiency they had moved through the battle itself. No one had told them how to grieve. The training manuals had not covered it, so they did not grieve. They filed the numbers. CT-1477, CT-2209, CT-8814, CT-3301. Unit numbers. No names. The war was 6 hours old, and already it had learned to count its dead in the most efficient possible way. One trooper stopped. Just for a moment. He was standing near a body, one of the first ones, face down in the red sand, and he stopped moving. Not for long. 3 seconds, maybe 4. He looked at the body. He looked at his own hands. The armor on his hands was identical to the armor on the body in the sand. The face under that helmet, if you removed it, would have been his own face. He knew this. He had always known this. The training had not hidden it. But knowing it in a classroom and standing here, on a battlefield, looking at his own hands, those were different things. He filed it away, moved on. The column was waiting. He would later call himself Rex. He was not Rex yet. Night came fast on Geonosis. The temperature dropped. The red of the rocks went dark. The gunships began their rotation, wounded out, equipment in, body bags loaded quietly in the back, while the official feeds broadcast celebration on the other side of the planet. The Republic had won its first battle. 61 Jedi were dead. An unknown number of clones. The final count would take 2 days, because the initial reporting protocols had not anticipated casualties at that scale on the first engagement. They adjusted the protocols. They always adjusted the protocols. There was no funeral, not for the clones. There would have been no way to hold one, practically speaking. The scale, the timeline, the next deployment already being calculated on Coruscant. These were reasonable considerations. No one made the decision to skip the funerals cruelly. No one made it consciously at all. It simply did not happen. A body was logged. A unit number was marked inactive in the Grand Army's system. The armor was assessed for reuse. The record closed. Somewhere in that record, in one closed file among thousands, CT-1477 stopped existing in any official sense. He had been alive for less than 10 years. He had been deployed for less than 1 day. The sand where he fell was already cooling. The transport lifted before full dark. It carried 214 troopers, most of them unwounded, a few of them bandaged, none of them speaking much. The engines came up beneath them. The hull vibrated with a low, constant hum that travelled through the floors and into the boots of every man standing in the hold. Rex found a space near the far wall. He sat down. He pressed his palm flat against the floor, not thinking about it, just doing it, and felt the vibration move through his hand. The engines, the ship, the air moving around them as they broke atmo. He looked at his palm. He thought about the trooper in the sand. He thought about his own hands. He did not think about what any of it meant. He was not avoiding the question. He genuinely did not have the words for it yet. He was 22 months old in the way clones counted, which meant he was approximately 10 in the way the galaxy counted, which meant he was not supposed to be here. But he was here. This was his life. The vibration kept moving through his palm, even and steady. The ship climbing away from Geonosis, carrying its living cargo toward the next assignment, the next battle, the next set of coordinates that someone else had chosen. Rex closed his eyes. The floor hummed. Below them, the red rock cooled in the dark. The sand settled. The battle's wreckage began the long, quiet process of becoming part of the landscape, the way all battlefields eventually did, given enough time. Geonosis did not know it had just started a war. Planets rarely do. On Coruscant, the Senate was already in emergency session. The Chancellor's office had issued a statement. The Jedi Council had issued a statement. Journalists were assembling their coverage. Citizens on the core worlds were watching their screens with that specific expression, part fear, part relief, part something harder to name, that people wear when they have just been told that a danger they did not fully understand has been met by a force they do not fully understand, and that everything is, apparently, under control. The Clone Wars had begun. The Republic called it a victory. Somewhere in the database of the Grand Army of the Republic, a file closed. CT-1477. Status: inactive. No name. No ceremony. No record of the 3 seconds he had spent looking at the sky over Geonosis before the sky went away. The galaxy moved on. It was very good at that. The rain never stopped on Kamino. Not once. Not in any record. Not in any account from anyone who had ever stood on those white platforms and looked out at the grey ocean stretching in every direction as far as the eye could reach. The rain just fell. Every hour. Every day. As constant as breathing. The clones grew up inside that sound. Kamino was a water world with no ground. The cities rose on stilts above an ocean that had no shore. The towers were white and smooth and curved, built by a species that had learned over thousands of years to make their buildings bend slightly in the wind rather than resist it. The Kaminoans moved through these towers like they moved through everything, slowly, quietly, with a precision that looked like calm but was closer to indifference. They were scientists, excellent ones. They did not think of what they were growing as people. This was not cruelty. It was a professional position, a necessary one, perhaps, given the work. They maintained it very carefully. The smell of the training facilities was something specific: antiseptic, recycled air, the faint metallic trace that came from the climate systems working too hard against the constant ocean moisture outside. A warmth that was not natural warmth. The warmth of machines keeping a space exactly habitable. Every clone who ever trained on Kamino carried that smell somewhere in the back of their memory. They could not always name it. They did not always know where it came from. But years later, on Ryloth, on Umbara, on Coruscant, if the air in a room hit a certain combination of warms and recycled and faintly metallic, something in them would go briefly still, not sad, not nostalgic, just still. The way a person goes still when they recognize something they did not know they remembered. The growth process took 10 years, compressed into 5. The Kaminoans had developed an accelerated aging protocol that was, by any technical measure, a marvel. The biological engineering required was extraordinary. Papers had been written about it. The Republic had paid an extraordinary sum for it. What the papers did not cover, what no technical document addressed, was what it felt like from the inside. To grow twice as fast as a human body was designed to grow. To be 10 years old in the body of a 20-year-old. To learn things at a rate that left no space between lessons for the lessons to settle. The clones did not complain about this. They had no comparison. This was simply the speed of being alive. But it meant something. It cost something. Even if the accounting for what it cost would not come until much later. Jango Fett walked through Kamino like a man who owned it without wanting it. He had negotiated the contract himself, his genetic material, his face, his build, his reflexes and his aggression and his particular capacity for surviving situations that killed other people. All of it sold, all of it replicated 100,000 times over. He did not look at the tanks. He did not walk through the training areas unless he had a meeting there. He had one condition in the contract, and the Kaminoans had honored it. One unaltered clone. One son raised as a son. Not accelerated, not flash-trained, not a unit. Boba. Jango loved Boba with the specific intensity of a man who had given everything else away and needed one thing to remain his. The rest of them, the 100,000 identical faces, the identical voices, the identical hands, he treated with a professional neutrality that was easier to maintain when he did not look directly at them. They had his face. He knew this. He walked past them in corridors, and they sometimes glanced at him, the ones young enough to still be curious, and he looked at a point above their heads and kept moving. He was the template. They were the product. He had made his peace with this, or he had built a wall around it that functioned well enough to be called peace. The training cohort, designated CT-777-4, was young. Young even by clone standards, accelerated bodies not yet at full development, running drills in the lower training yards in the grey half-light of a Kamino afternoon. They were curious in the way young things are curious, before they are taught to redirect that energy into something useful. They asked questions, not about the war, not about the Jedi, or the Senate, or the Separatists. Those concepts were being fed to them in doses, timed to readiness assessments. They asked about small things, whether the ocean below had anything living in it, whether the towers ever fell, why the Kaminoans' eyes were so far apart, whether rain on other planets sounded different. The instructors answered the relevant questions and redirected the rest. Curiosity was useful when it served the mission. In other applications, it was inefficiency. They invented a game in the training yard. It did not have a name. None of their games had names. Naming things was not something they had been taught to invest time in. The game involved 2 lines, a distance of about 30 meters, and the objective of reaching the other side without being tagged by whoever was designated as the interceptor. Simple, physical, loud. They played it in the 20-minute rest period after combat drills, in the brief window before the next rotation, while the Kaminoan supervisors logged data at their stations and did not intervene because elevated heart rate in rest periods was within acceptable parameters. They were very loud when they played. This is worth noting. The same voices that would later operate in near silence on battlefield comms, clipped, professional, stripped of everything unnecessary, were, in the training yards of Kamino, genuinely loud. They laughed. Not often, not for long, but they laughed. They ranked each other in wrestling. Informally, over several weeks, a hierarchy emerged, not ordered by the Kaminoans, but constructed entirely by the cohort itself in the margins of their free time. The top position changed hands regularly. The bottom position was occupied, steadfastly and without apparent concern, by a trooper whose designation ended in -902, who was extraordinarily bad at wrestling and had decided, somewhere around his 3rd consecutive loss, that this was simply information about himself and not a problem. He was good at other things. He was very fast in the open field. He could read terrain in a way that the instructors noted in his assessment files with phrases like, demonstrates unusual spatial awareness. He would later prove this on 3 different battlefields. He would not be on a 4th. One of them collected stones. This is the detail that does not fit anywhere in the record, which is perhaps why it is worth keeping. His designation was CT-4774. He had no nickname. Not yet. Maybe never. At some point in his 2nd year of training, during outdoor drills in the lower yard, he had picked up a small piece of grey rock from the ground. Not a remarkable piece. Flat. Smooth on one side, where rain had worked at it. He kept it. Then he kept another. Then another. Within a few months, his uniform pockets were consistently heavy with small stones from the training yard floor. Different sizes, different textures. All of them from Kamino. No one asked him why. The ones who noticed either didn't know how to ask or sensed, correctly, that he could not have answered. He did not know why either. He just liked having them, the weight of them, the fact that they were real and solid and had been somewhere before he picked them up and would be somewhere after. He carried them through every training rotation, through every physical assessment, through the bunk inspections that the Kaminoans ran monthly. The stones were never flagged as contraband because the regulations had not thought to mention stones. He would be deployed with the first wave. He would die on Ryloth. His pockets would be full. The deployment order came on a morning like every other morning. Rain on the windows. Grey light. The smell of recycled air and antiseptic. The training corridors full of the sound of boots. The specific rhythm of 1,000 people moving through a space in organized sequence. A sound that on Kamino was as constant as the rain itself. Then the announcement. It came through every speaker in every corridor simultaneously. Deployment. Immediate. Reporting to transport bays within 6 hours. The corridors went still. Not silent. The environmental systems kept running. The rain kept falling. But the boots stopped. Every pair of boots in every corridor, at almost the exact same moment, stopped moving. 1,000 men, standing still, listening. The stillness lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then the movement resumed. Faster now, purposeful. The transition from training mode to deployment mode was something they had drilled for. The Kaminoans had been very thorough about that particular sequence. But the 4 seconds were real. 4 seconds in which 1,000 men who had been built for this moment, trained for this moment, flash-educated and physically optimized and psychologically conditioned for exactly this, stood still. Something had moved through them, not fear. They had been trained past the kind of fear that stops a person, not excitement. That was not quite the right word for what moved through 1,000 identical faces in a corridor on a rainy Kamino morning. Something simpler. The recognition that the distance between training and the real thing was a door, and the door had just opened, and there was no closing it again from the other side. CT-4774 stood in the corridor with his cohort. His pockets were full of stones. When the movement resumed around him, he fell into step with his brothers, automatically, without thinking, the way they all did, and moved toward the transport bays. He did not empty his pockets. He did not think about the stones at all. He just walked, and the stones were there. The familiar weight of them against his legs, and the boots around him made their rhythm on the durasteel floor, and the rain hit the windows above them, and Kamino fell away behind them as they loaded into the transports and the bay doors closed. Jango Fett watched the transports lift from a high platform. He did not watch for long. He went back inside. In his quarters, Boba was asleep, small, unaccelerated, taking the time that growing was supposed to take. Jango sat near the window. The ocean was dark. The rain fell on it in patterns too complex to follow. He watched it for a while. Then he stopped watching it and went to sleep. The training corridors were empty by nightfall, completely empty. The kind of empty that is different from unused. The kind that remembers being full. The boot scuffs on the floor. The worn patches on the wall corners where thousands of shoulders had brushed through. The faint smell of the cohort that had occupied this space for years and was now somewhere over the planet's atmosphere, moving away through the dark. The Kaminoans logged the facility as cleared, began recalibration for the next batch. The work continued. It always continued. Outside, the rain fell on the grey ocean. The ocean did not register the transports lifting, did not register the corridors emptying, did not register any of it. It had been here long before the towers. It would be here long after. On a transport rising through Kamino's atmosphere, a clone pressed his palm against the cold metal floor of the ship and felt the vibration moving through it, the engines, the hull, the dark around them. He did not know his name yet. He did not know that one day he would choose one. He only knew the vibration, constant, mechanical, indifferent, and the weight of his brothers around him, and the feeling of having just left the only place he had ever been. The corridor below was quiet. The floor where he used to train was empty. The stones in CT-4774's pockets were already far from the ground that made them. And somewhere ahead, past the dark, past the hyperspace jump, past the briefings and the weapon checks, and the first sight of a real battlefield, Geonosis waited, red and dry and burning, ready. She was 14 years old, and she walked into a war zone like she was late for something. No hesitation at the landing pad, no pause at the sound of artillery in the distance, just a quick scan of the situation, a tilt of her head, and then she was moving toward the fighting, toward the noise, toward the one place every reasonable person was moving away from. Anakin Skywalker watched her do this. He did not know what to say. He did not know what to say for the next 3 minutes, which was unusual for him. Her name was Ahsoka Tano. She was Togruta, 14, assigned to him by the Jedi Council as his Padawan learner, a fact that had been communicated to him approximately 40 minutes before she arrived, which was not enough time, and he knew it, and the Council knew it, and no one seemed particularly concerned. She handed him a message from Master Yoda. He read it. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the specific expression of someone who has already decided they are not going to be intimidated and is doing a reasonable job of it. He handed the message back. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know," she said. "Neither did I." Then the artillery got closer. They both moved, and that was how it started. Christophsis was a crystal world. The buildings were blue-white. The streets reflected light in patterns that shifted as the sun moved. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Under these circumstances, it was a battlefield with good lighting. The separatist blockade had been strangling the planet for weeks. The Republic forces on the ground were holding, barely. Supply lines were cut. Civilians were caught between the armies. The situation was the kind that required a solution and had not yet received one. Anakin had been working on the solution. Now he was also working on not knowing what to do with a 14-year-old. She was not what he expected. He had expected someone quieter, more careful, someone who would stand back and observe and ask respectful questions and wait to be taught. Ahsoka did not wait. Within the first hour, she had assessed the tactical situation, identified 2 things the command staff had missed, and told Anakin about both of them directly, not as suggestions, as observations, delivered with the confidence of someone who had thought them through and was simply reporting conclusions. One of the observations was wrong. One of them was right, and it changed the defensive positioning on the south approach, and 3 clones who would have died in the next assault did not die. Anakin noted both things. He did not tell her which was which. He watched her figure it out herself over the next 6 hours, and when she did, she adjusted without being asked. He noted that too. Rex watched all of this from a careful distance. He had been with Anakin long enough to know how his general operated, the instinct, the speed, the way he made decisions that should not work, and mostly did. He trusted Anakin the way you trust someone who has proven themselves in the field, which is a specific and earned kind of trust. He did not know what to make of the girl yet. She was fast. That was obvious. She moved through the crystal streets with a physical confidence that most soldiers took months to develop in active combat zones. But she was also 14. Rex had brothers who had died at 22, 23, ages that already felt young. 14 was a number that did not belong in a briefing room. He kept this thought to himself. He kept most of his thoughts to himself. It was a useful habit in a war. The mission on Teth came 3 weeks later. A Hutt child, Jabba's son, Rota, had been kidnapped. The Republic needed the Hutt's hyperspace routes. Anakin and Ahsoka were sent to retrieve the child from a monastery on Teth. A jungle world, steep cliffs, a Bomar Order temple built into the rock face above the tree line. The climb was vertical. The droids were waiting at the top. Anakin looked at the cliff and started climbing. Ahsoka looked at the cliff, looked at Anakin, and started climbing faster. He noticed. He did not say anything. They climbed. The monastery was held by battle droids, and worse. The fighting inside was close, corridors too narrow for formations, sightlines too short for strategy. The kind of combat that came down to instinct and speed, and the ability to make correct decisions in the half-second between one problem and the next. Ahsoka was good at this, better than good. There was a moment in the East Corridor when Anakin gave her a direct order to hold a position, to stay, to cover the rear, to not move until he came back. She did not stay. She moved. She moved because she had seen something he had not seen, a droid flanking position that would have cut off his exit, and she neutralized it and was back at her position before he returned. He came back. He looked at her. He looked at the evidence of what she had done. She looked back at him with that expression again. Not defiant, not apologetic, just present. Just the face of someone who made a call and was prepared to stand behind it. He had felt this before, this particular mixture of frustration and something warmer underneath it. Both times it had been for people he loved. He did not examine this. He told her not to disobey orders. She said, "Yes, Master." Neither of them believed the conversation was over. They retrieved the child, Rota, small, ill, wrapped in cloth. Unimpressed by the people carrying him, turned out to be easier to recover than to transport. A sick Huttlet was not a convenient thing to carry through a combat extraction. Ahsoka carried him, without being asked, without making anything of it. She just picked him up, secured him against her side, and kept fighting with her free hand. Anakin watched her do this, and felt something shift slightly in his assessment of her. Not her skill. He had already revised that upward twice. Something else. She was not performing. Most people, in a situation that difficult, performed at least a little, showed their competence with some awareness that it was being watched. Ahsoka was just doing the thing that needed doing. The audience was irrelevant. He had spent years trying to teach himself to operate that way. She already did it naturally. The space between missions was quieter, not peaceful. The war did not offer peace, only pauses, but quieter. Hours on the Resolute, between deployments, when there was no immediate crisis requiring immediate action, and the ship moved through hyperspace with that low constant hum, and the lights were dimmer in the corridors. Ahsoka asked questions in these spaces, not tactical questions, not training questions. Questions like, why did the Jedi code forbid attachment if attachment was what made people want to protect each other? Questions like, if the Force connected all living things, did it feel the clones differently than it felt other people? Questions like, did he ever miss Tatooine? The attachment question, he deflected. He gave her the answer he had been given. The formal one, the one about how attachment led to fear of loss, and fear of loss led to the dark side. He said it cleanly, and it landed cleanly. And Ahsoka listened and nodded, and then looked at him with an expression that meant she was not finished thinking about it. He was not finished thinking about it either. He had never been finished thinking about it. The Force question he answered more honestly than he intended to. He said he did not know how the Force felt the clones, that it was something the healers were studying, that the war had produced a kind of, he paused here, looking for the word, a kind of pressure in the Force that hadn't been there before, that he felt it sometimes between battles, a low weight behind the eyes. Ahsoka was quiet for a moment. I feel it too, she said. He looked at her. She was 14. She had been in the war for 3 weeks. She already felt it. He did not know what to do with this information, so he filed it in the place where he kept things he was not ready to look at. The Tatooine question he did not answer at all. He changed the subject. She let him change it. But she remembered the question. He could tell she remembered it. And she did not ask it again, which meant she understood that the not answering was itself an answer. She was perceptive in ways that were going to be inconvenient. He had a feeling about this, a clear one. He was right. Rex watched them at a mission briefing 6 weeks in. Anakin was running through a tactical display, planet surface, entry points, extraction routes. The kind of briefing he ran efficiently, moving fast, expecting his officers to keep up. He did not slow down for confusion. He backtracked for good questions. Ahsoka asked 3 good questions. Rex watched Anakin answer them. Watched the way he turned toward her when she spoke. Not the polite quarter turn of a general addressing a subordinate, but a full orientation. His attention actually present in a way it was not always present in briefings. Rex had seen Anakin care about things. He cared about the mission, about the men, about getting the right outcome. This was different from those things. Rex could not name it exactly. He did not have the vocabulary for it. His life had not given him the context. He had brothers. He knew what that felt like, the specific weight of people whose survival mattered to you beyond strategy, beyond mission value, just because they were there and they were yours. What Anakin did when he looked at Ahsoka was adjacent to that, close to it, not identical. Rex filed it, moved on. He was good at moving on. The third name's superstition had started traveling through the battalions by this point. No one knew where it began. It moved the way rumors moved among the clones, not through official channels, not through any deliberate communication, but through proximity and trust. A brother told a brother, in quiet moments, in the dark between shifts. Every clone had a number. Some had nicknames, but some, more every week, had a third name, their own, private, spoken only inside. Rex knew about the superstition. He had not decided yet whether to participate in it. He was still figuring out what kind of person he was. The war was helping with that in the way that difficult things help, by removing everything that was not essential and showing you what remained. What remained in Rex so far, precision, loyalty, and a capacity for doubt that he had not been trained to have and could not locate the source of. He suspected the doubt was the most important part. He had not told anyone this. Ahsoka left the briefing room quickly. Missions ran on tight schedules. She had a gear check, a meditation rotation, 2 things Anakin had assigned her to review before next deployment. She walked fast. She was always walking fast, always slightly ahead of where she needed to be, as if stillness was something she had to earn. Anakin stood at the briefing room doorway and watched her go. Rex was still in the room. He saw Anakin's face. He saw the thing that moved across it, brief, unguarded, gone in 2 seconds. Something tightened in Anakin's expression. Not pain, not quite. The shadow of something that lived near pain. Rex looked away. Some things were not his to observe. Anakin stood there for a moment longer. The corridor was empty now. Ahsoka's footsteps already out of hearing range. He had felt this before, twice. The first time with Padme. That specific tightening, that awareness of a person existing in the world in a way that made the world feel different. That sensation that was warm and frightening in equal measure. The second time on Tatooine. The night his mother died in his arms. The feeling of someone he loved being somewhere he could not reach them. He did not examine the fact that these were the same feeling. He was very practiced at not examining things. He turned back to the briefing room. There was another deployment to prepare for, another set of coordinates. Another mission that would require everything he had and would not leave space for anything else. This was the convenience of war. It was always demanding the next thing. It never let you stand still long enough to see clearly. He was grateful for this more often than he would admit. Somewhere in the ship's lower decks, Ahsoka sat cross-legged in a storage bay she had claimed as a meditation space. It was not a real meditation space. It smelled like equipment and recycled air, the same faint metallic warmth that the Kamino facilities had smelled like, though she had never been to Kamino and could not have known that. She breathed. She tried to feel the Force the way her early training had taught her. Open, receptive, without agenda. The Force was there. It was always there. but it felt different out here, heavier, like something large was pressing on it from a direction she could not identify. She breathed through it. She was 14 years old, she was in a war, and she had a master who was teaching her things. He did not know he was teaching her. She did not know yet what any of it would cost. She just breathed. The ship moved through hyperspace. The corridor outside was quiet. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the next battle was already waiting. Nobody decided to change the Jedi Order. That is the important thing to understand. There was no meeting, no vote, no moment where someone stood up and said, "This is where we stop being what we were and start being something else." It happened in smaller units than that, one decision at a time, each one reasonable, each one necessary, each one closing off something that would not be noticed as missing until much later. This is how institutions change when they do not mean to. Not with a break, with a drift. Malastare came first. The planet was fuel. Specifically, it sat on some of the largest fuel reserves in the mid-rim, and the Republic needed those reserves, and the Separatists knew the Republic needed them, which made Malastare a target. The battle was won. In the process, a weapon was used. An electroproton bomb deployed against a Separatist droid army. The bomb worked. The droids were neutralized. It also woke something that had been sleeping under the planet's surface for a very long time. A Zillo beast, ancient, the size of a city block. Furious in the way that things are furious when they are pulled from darkness into a war they have no context for. The Dugs, who lived on Malastara, wanted it dead. The Republic scientists wanted it alive. Its scales were nearly lightsaber resistant, and that kind of material had obvious military applications. Anakin stood between these two positions and made the call that kept the alliance intact and the beast alive. He did not think of it as a compromise. It was just the decision that kept the most things working. This was the texture of the war's middle period. Not grand betrayals, just decisions that kept the most things working, made quickly by people who were tired and needed the alliance intact. Mace Windu went to Ryloth. The planet was occupied. Twi'lek civilians trapped between Separatist forces and a Republic liberation campaign that had stalled on the outskirts. The supply lines were broken. The ground campaign needed to move. He made a decision. He used Twi'lek freedom fighters, Cham Syndulla's people, as a diversionary force. Send them forward. Draw the Separatist guns. Create the opening the Republic forces needed to push through. It worked. The campaign advanced. The occupation broke. Ryloth was liberated. Mace Windu stood in the freed capital and accepted the gratitude of a people who had survived something terrible and were, for now, safe. He said the right things. He meant them. That night, he did not sleep well. He did not examine why. He was a Jedi Master, and he had made a tactically sound decision in service of a legitimate objective, and the outcome was correct, and the people of Ryloth were free. He lay in the dark, and the numbers moved through his head. Not the battle numbers, the other numbers. How many of Cham's people had walked into those guns? How many of them had families? How many of them had agreed because they trusted the Republic's generals and had walked forward into the fire on that trust? He did not call this guilt. He was too precise for imprecision about his own interior states. He called it the cost of the correct decision. He filed it where he filed other costs. He went back to the war. Obi-Wan Kenobi went to Mandalore. This was a different kind of mission entirely. Mandalore was officially neutral. Death Watch terrorists on one side, Duchess Satine's pacifist government on the other, and underneath both of them, a current of old Mandalorian identity that did not fit neatly into either position. Obi-Wan moved through this situation as a diplomat, then as a spy, then, when it became necessary, as a fighter, then back to diplomat before anyone with official standing could confirm what they had seen. The Jedi Code had given him extensive preparation for discernment, for peace, for the patient reading of the Force in complex situations. It had given him very little preparation for this, for the specific work of operating in the gap between what was true and what could be officially acknowledged. He was good at it anyway. This was perhaps the more uncomfortable fact. He was good at it, and he knew he was good at it, and he noticed that the war was increasingly asking for the things he was good at. The flexibility, the willingness to work in grey spaces, and less frequently asking for the things the Order had been built around. He noticed this. He did not know what to do with the noticing. He went back to the war. Anakin interrogated a captured Separatist commander on a transport above Felucia. The commander had information, troop positions, coordinates, the kind of data that had a short, useful life. If the positions changed before the Republic could act, the information was worthless and people would die for nothing. Anakin needed it quickly. He got it quickly. What he did in the room, the specific method, the particular pressure applied, the line between persuasion and something adjacent to it, was not recorded in the official after-action report. The information was accurate. The positions were hit. The mission succeeded. Anakin left the room and did not think about what he had done in it. Not that day. Not for a long time. This was a skill the war was teaching him efficiently. The ability to move through a necessary action and seal it behind him without looking back. To keep walking. To keep the mission moving. He was very good at it. He had always been good at not looking at certain things. The war just gave him more things to not look at. The temple was emptying, not dramatically, not all at once. But the meditation halls that had once held 40 nights in the High Watch hour now held 12, sometimes 8. The senior masters who had maintained the daily teaching rotations for decades were now dividing their time between Coruscant and the front. More front, less Coruscant, the ratio shifting slowly every month. Padawans were being knighted earlier. The trials that had once taken years of preparation were being compressed, not eliminated. The council was careful about that, but compressed, adjusted. The war needed Jedi Knights, and the Order had Padawans who were ready enough. Ready enough was a different standard than ready. Nobody said this aloud. A Jedi Knight named Das Janir returned to the temple after 8 months on the Outer Rim front. He had fought on 4 planets. He had lost 2 men he had trained alongside for years. He had made decisions in the field that he had not been able to consult the council about, because the situations moved faster than the communication channels could keep up with. He walked through the temple's main corridor on his first morning back. The light came through the upper windows the way it always had, angled, gold, the kind of light that made the temple feel like something ancient and permanent. He walked to the meditation hall. He opened the door. It was empty. Not closed for the day. Not between sessions. Empty in the middle of High Watch. The hour that had been dedicated to communal meditation since before he was born, since before his master was born, since the current configuration of the temple had existed. He stood in the doorway. He did not go in. He stood there and listened to the silence and tried to remember what it used to sound like when it was full. The breathing of 40 people, the specific quality of that many minds in stillness, the feeling of the Force moving quietly through a room that was doing nothing except being present. He could remember it. He just could not hear it. He stood there for a moment that was not measurable in seconds. Then he turned around. He had a debrief in 30 minutes. The war was always asking for the next thing. The boots kept moving through the temple's corridors. Fewer of them now. Faster. The rhythm had changed. Not the slow, deliberate pace of people with time for reflection, but the compressed, purposeful movement of people with the next thing already waiting. The temple had not changed. The people inside it had. Not completely. Not irreversibly. Not yet. They were still Jedi. They were just no longer only Jedi. And the distance between those two things was growing at a rate that no one was officially measuring. On Ryloth, in the ruins of a sector that had been a market before the occupation, CT-4774 bent down and picked up a small stone from the rubble. Not Kamino stone. This one was darker, rougher, with a reddish dust on its surface from the local soil. He looked at it, put it in his pocket. His pockets were already heavy. He had been adding Ryloth stones since the campaign started, adding them to the Kamino collection, the two types mixing together until he could no longer tell them apart by feel. He did not think about what this meant. He just kept them. He stood up. His squad was moving. He fell into step. The boots on the rubble-strewn streets of Ryloth made a different sound than boots on Durasteel, heavier, less clean. He matched the rhythm. He kept walking. Rex watched Anakin after Ryloth, not looking for anything specific, just watching. The way he had learned to watch people in the field, reading the small signals that predicted behavior under pressure. Anakin was fine, functioning, sharp in the briefings, precise in the field, still moving the way he always moved, with that quality of absolute intention, like every step was already on its way to the next one. But something had changed in the very small signals, the pauses before answers that used to be immediate, the moments when his eyes went somewhere Rex could not follow, the way he looked occasionally at the clones around him, not as commanders look at troops, but with something more personal that he shut off quickly when he noticed Rex noticing. Rex said nothing. This was correct. This was his call. Some things were not his to name. The war kept moving. It always kept moving. The first sign was the route. Rex looked at the tactical display and looked at the route General Krell had chosen and felt something move through him that he did not have a clean name for. Not confusion. He understood the route. That was the problem. He understood it, and it did not make sense. And General Krell was a Jedi Master, with 4 lightsabers and a record that the Republic command structure cited as exemplary. And Rex had been built, literally built, to trust the command structure. He stood in the briefing room on Umbara and looked at the route, and felt the unnamed thing, and said nothing. Not yet. Umbara was dark, not the dark of nighttime, the dark of a world that received its sun's light at the wrong angle, filtered through an atmosphere that converted it into something cold and purple and wrong. The native flora glowed faintly. The terrain was broken. The air smelled like something chemical, faintly sweet in a way that made the back of the throat feel strange. The 501st had been deployed under General Skywalker. Then General Skywalker was recalled. General Pong Krell arrived in his place. Krell was tall, basilisk, 4 arms, heavy frame, the kind of physical presence that filled a room by occupying it, rather than performing in it. He looked at the clones the way you looked at equipment. Not cruelly, not with contempt. With the flat professional assessment of someone who has already decided what a thing is for and does not require further data. He gave orders. The orders were aggressive. Casualties acceptable in a way that acceptable rarely meant acceptable. It meant the mission mattered more than the men, and the men were to proceed accordingly. The clones proceeded. They were built to proceed. Rex proceeded. He gave the orders Krell gave him. He moved his men through the dark terrain of Umbara. He watched them fight and die and fight again, and he processed each loss with the efficiency he had trained for, and he kept the column moving. But something was accumulating. Not one decision, not one order. The accumulation of orders that, separately, each had a military justification, but together formed a shape that Rex could not stop seeing once he had seen it. The shape was this. The men were being spent. Not risked, spent. There is a difference. Risk implies the possibility of return. What Krell was doing with the 501st on Umbara was a calculation in which their survival was not a variable he was optimizing for. Rex understood this on the 3rd day. He did not understand it as a revelation. He understood it quietly, the way you understand something you have been feeling for a while once it finally has a shape. He stood in the dark of Umbara and understood it, and kept moving. Because stopping required a certainty he was still building toward. CT-4774 was not on Umbara. He was still on Ryloth in the campaign's final phase. He died on the 4th day of that phase, in a canyon engagement that lasted 11 minutes and achieved its objective. His pockets were full of stones when they found him. Kamino grey, Ryloth red. 43 of them, counted later by a brother who did not know why he was counting, but could not stop. No ceremony, no name read aloud. His designation was logged inactive. The 43 stones were not logged. They were left in the canyon. The wind moved over them. They were still there. The citadel was a different kind of cost. A prison facility, separatist held, built into a cliff on Lola Sayu, designed specifically to hold Jedi. The electrified walls, the ray shields, so the guards calibrated to force-sensitive reflexes. Master, even PL, was inside it. He had intel, coordinates, critical coordinates, split between himself and his captain, so that neither one could be fully useful alone. The mission to extract him was dangerous in the specific way that missions with no good options are dangerous. Not because the plan was bad, but because the situation had been constructed to make every plan bad. They went anyway. They got him out. Then he died anyway. Not in the prison, but in the escape. In a fight that came in the last stage, when the extraction was almost complete. Ahsoka held him at the end. He gave her his half of the coordinates because she was there and he was dying and someone had to carry it. She received the information. She felt the weight of it, not the strategic weight, but the specific heaviness of being handed something important by someone who was giving it to her because they no longer could. She carried it back. She delivered it. The mission was a success. Even PL was dead. Both things were true simultaneously, and neither one cancelled the other out. And this, Ahsoka was learning, was the specific mathematics of the war. Success and loss occupying the same space, both real, neither resolving the other. Back on Umbara, Rex made a decision. He had been building toward it for days. The specific moment was this. An order came down from Krell to move 2 platoons across an open field toward a fortified position. The field offered no cover. The position was well defended. The math was simple, and the math said most of those men would not come back from the crossing. Rex looked at the order. He thought about the shape he had identified 3 days ago. He thought about his brothers in those 2 platoons. He thought about the thing he had been built for. The following of orders, the trust in command, the absolute reliability of a clone soldier as a unit in a system designed to function on that reliability. Then he thought about CT-1477, face down on Geonosis. No name, no ceremony. He filed a formal objection through the command channel. Krell overruled it in 40 seconds. Rex gave the order. The platoons moved. The math was correct. Afterward, Rex stood at the edge of the field and counted. He counted for a long time. The 3rd name. It was moving through the battalions faster now. The quiet superstition, the private name spoken only inside, the one piece of ownership the clones had that no system could log. After Umbara, after Krell was exposed and arrested, and the full scope of what he had done became visible to the clones who had survived it. After all of that, Rex sat alone in a transport bay and thought about the 3rd name. He had been avoiding it, not from doubt, from precision. He wanted to be sure of the name before he took it. He was not a person who did things halfway. He sat in the transport bay. He thought. After a while, he had a name. He did not say it aloud. He said it inside, once, to make sure it fit. It fit. He kept it. He would carry it from now on. No one would ever know what it was. Mon Cala was water. The war came to the ocean world when its king died, and the succession fractured along species lines. Mon Calamari and Quarren, traditional allies, pulling toward opposite sides of the conflict. Anakin and Padme went. Kit Fisto went. Clone scuba troopers deployed into an underwater war. The fighting was strange and slow the way underwater fighting is strange and slow. The physics different, the visibility limited, the sound conducted through water in ways that made distances hard to judge. They won. The new king was established. The Mon Calamari fleet, those massive, elegant warships, joined the Republic. Strategically, it was significant. What the narrator records instead, a young Mon Calamari soldier, newly conscripted, fighting in water he had grown up swimming in for pleasure, looking through his visor at a Quarren soldier across a kelp forest and recognizing him, a neighbor, someone whose family had eaten at his family's table. They fired at each other. One of them missed. The other did not. The narrator does not record which one survived. It does not matter to the math. It matters to everything else. Kadavo was the one Ahsoka did not talk about. The Zagarian slave processing facility, a place designed with the specific purpose of breaking people, not killing them, breaking them, removing the thing inside a person that made them a person, leaving the body functional and the self gone. The Togruta of Kairos were there, her people, not personally. She had grown up in the Jedi temple. She had no village, no family by blood, Shaners, but her species, the specific curve of a Montrol's like hers, the facial markings she saw in the mirror, here, on people who had been stripped of everything, except the biological fact of still being alive. She did not say anything the narrator can record. She moved through that facility and freed them and fought the people who needed fighting and did the work. But Anakin watched her. He watched the way she moved through those corridors. Precise, fast, completely controlled. Too controlled. The specific control of someone who has found something that requires a response they cannot afford to give right now. So they are storing it somewhere internal and doing the work. He recognized this method. He had invented it. Afterwards, she was very still for a long time. He stood near her and did not know what to do with his hands. He wanted to say something. He did not know what the right thing was. He said nothing. This was wrong. He would not know it was wrong until much later. Rex filed the after-action report from Umbara on a standard datapad in a standard format. Date, location, units deployed, objectives achieved, casualties sustained. Casualties were listed by designation number. The objectives were listed as achieved. The report was accurate in every fact it contained. He read it back once when he was done. Every sentence was true. The report said nothing about the field crossing, nothing about the 4 seconds before he gave the order, nothing about the counting afterward. Nothing about the shape he had identified in Krell's command pattern. Nothing about what it meant to discover that the structure he had been built inside could be turned against him by someone functioning within that same structure. Nothing about any of it. He submitted the report. He held the datapad for a moment after. He had never produced a document before that he did not fully believe. He set the datapad down. He went to find his brothers, the ones who were left. The boots on Umbara's dark ground had made a sound unlike any other campaign. Softer. The terrain absorbed it. You could not hear the column moving the way you could on Durasteel or on rock. You could only feel it, the vibration through the soles, the sense of other bodies moving in the same direction. Rex had pressed his palm to the ground once, near the end of the campaign. Not thinking, just doing it. The way he had done it on the transport after Geonosis. The way the floor of Kamino had vibrated under his boots his whole life. Umbara did not vibrate. It was just ground, dark and still and absorbing everything. He lifted his palm. He kept moving. The explosion happened at first watch. Most of the temple was still in the deep quiet of the night cycle. The halls were empty. The lights in the meditation corridors were at their lowest setting. That particular amber dimness that the temple maintained between deep watch and dawn. A concession to the biological reality that even Jedi needed the dark to sleep. Then the bomb went off. The sound moved through the building, the way sound moves through stone, absorbed, distributed, felt in the walls and the floors and the soles of feet before it was heard by ears. People woke not to a noise, but to a vibration. The same vibration that ran through ships, through training floors, through the ground of every battlefield, here, in the temple, where it was not supposed to be. 6 people died in the initial blast. More in the collapse that followed. By High Watch, the investigation had begun. By the end of that day, they had a name. Ahsoka Tano had been near the munitions storage. This was the fact the investigation returned to. Not the only fact. There were others. Fragments of evidence that assembled into a shape. But this was the one that anchored everything else. She had been near the munitions storage at a time she could not fully account for. She was a known force sensitive with combat training. The evidence pointed. The investigation followed where it pointed. She was expelled from the Jedi Order before the tribunal convened. Not as punishment, as procedure, as the formal step required when a member of the Order faced charges of this severity. The temporary removal of status pending resolution. The Council delivered this decision. Faces she had known for years. Masters who had watched her grow from a youngling into a soldier, who had assigned her missions, reviewed her progress, approved her advancement. They looked at her across the council chamber, and they believed they were doing the right thing. This is the part that is hardest to hold. They were not performing justice. They were not covering for someone or protecting an institution at her expense. They genuinely believed the evidence. They genuinely believed the procedure was correct. They were wrong in the most complete way a person can be wrong, without malice, without awareness, with full institutional sincerity. Ahsoka stood in the chamber and received their decision. She did not argue. She had learned, somewhere in 3 years of war, that some moments required stillness rather than motion. This was one of them. She walked out of the chamber, and the doors closed behind her, and she stood in the corridor outside, and the temple felt different than it had ever felt before. The same stone, the same amber light, the same air, different. The way a place feels different when you are no longer certain it is yours. Anakin was not in the council chamber. He had not been consulted on the expulsion decision. It had moved too fast, procedure running on its own momentum, the council operating within its established framework, each step following logically from the last. When he found out, he went still for a moment in a way that the clone officer standing nearest him would later describe as the stillest he had ever seen General Skywalker. Then he moved. When Anakin Skywalker decided to find something, the finding was rarely slow. He pulled every thread available to him, every contact, every piece of surveillance data he could access through channels that were, technically, available to a Jedi general with his security clearance if the general in question was willing to interpret the boundaries of that clearance generously. He was willing. He did not think of this as investigation. He thought of it as Ahsoka. It was the only language he had for the thing he felt. Action. Movement toward the problem. The absolute refusal to accept a conclusion that his instinct rejected, which was not always reliable. except that in this case, his instinct was also his knowledge of a person he had trained alongside for 2 years. He knew Ahsoka, not as a file, not as a record or an assessment or a set of competency markers. He knew how she moved, how she thought, how she handled fear, not by suppressing it, but by doing the next thing anyway, which was different. She had not done this. He knew it the way he knew when a hyperdrive was about to fail, not from the data, from the feel. He kept pulling threads. The tribunal convened in a Republic military court. This was the second removal, from Jedi jurisdiction to Republic jurisdiction. A further step, a formal acknowledgement that the charges had crossed into territory the Order could not contain internally. Ahsoka sat at the defendant's position and looked at the assembled faces. Republic military officers, senators, the formal apparatus of a government that was, she had learned in 3 years of fighting for it, considerably more complicated than its founding document suggested. Tarkin was there. She had met him before, briefly. He had a way of looking at people that suggested he had already decided what they were worth, and found the number acceptable but not impressive. He looked at her this way now. She looked back at him and kept her face still and thought about nothing that would show on her face. She had learned this too. The war had taught her many things she had not asked to learn. Outside the courtroom, the city moved. Coruscant did not stop. It never stopped. The traffic lanes above, the lower levels below, the endless layered motion of a planet that had been continuously inhabited for so long, it had forgotten what its own surface looked like. Somewhere in that city, in a district called the Works, something was waiting to be found. Anakin found it. Not cleanly, not quickly. Through a series of contacts and risks and moments where the line between a Jedi general conducting an investigation and a man doing whatever he needed to do for someone he loved was not a line that bore close examination. He found the trail. He followed it. Barriss Offee was a Jedi Padawan, Miriellen, quiet, known within the Order for her skill as a healer, the patience required for that work, the particular quality of attention it demanded. She had been at the front. She had served well. Her record was clean. She had also bombed the temple. Anakin found her. The confrontation was physical. She fought, genuinely fought, with a skill that required everything he had to match. She had clearly been preparing for this moment, or one like it. She had not expected to simply be found and surrender. When it was over and she was held, she was very calm. Not the calm of someone defeated, the calm of someone who had already accepted where this was going and had decided that what mattered now was the saying of it. Her confession was given at the tribunal. She said the Jedi Order had lost its way, that the war was not something that had happened to the Order, but something the Order had chosen and continued to choose, that every general who led clones into battle was participating in a system that the Jedi had agreed to join without fully examining what joining it would cost them, that she had been to the front, that she had seen what the front did to people, that she had come back and walked through the temple and seen the same institution that sent people to the front still operating as if its hands were clean. She said she was not right. She knew she was not right. What she had done was wrong, and she was not asking anyone to call it right. She said, but what she had seen was real. She looked at the assembled faces of the tribunal. She said, someone should have said this out loud a long time ago. Then she was quiet. The tribunal was quiet. Not the quiet of agreement. Not the quiet of dismissal. The quiet of an institution that had just heard something it recognized and did not know what to do with the recognition. The charges against Ahsoka were dropped. The tribunal dissolved. The Republic officers filed their paperwork. The machinery of official process ran its completion sequence, and the case closed. She was innocent. It was established, documented, entered into the record. The Jedi Council called her back to the temple. They assembled in the council chamber. The same faces, the same room, the same amber light from the windows that curved over Coruscant's endless skyline. Mace Windu spoke. He said they had been wrong. He said this clearly, without qualification, which cost him something that did not show on his face. He offered her place back. Not just her place, her rank as Padawan. The formal restoration of everything that had been taken by the expulsion. A return to exactly where she had been before the bomb went off. He said the Jedi Code was clear on this. She had been found innocent. The Order welcomed her home. He meant it. Ahsoka stood in the council chamber and listened. She looked at Mace Windu. She thought about the speed of the expulsion, how the procedure had moved before anyone had fully tested the evidence. How the faces in this room had looked at her across this same space and delivered a decision they believed was correct. She thought about the tribunal, about sitting at that defendant's position and watching Republic military officers conduct a proceeding over her life while she had no standing, no recourse, no mechanism through which her knowledge of herself could be entered into the official calculation. She thought about Barriss, about the thing Barriss had seen that was wrong and was also real. She thought about 3 years of war, about Umbara and Kadavo and the Citadel and the field on Moncala, where a neighbour killed a neighbour in water they had both grown up swimming in for pleasure. She thought about all of this very quickly. It did not take long. She already knew the answer. She had known it in the corridor outside this room. After the expulsion, when the temple had felt different. She had known it then, and she had not let herself know that she knew it, because knowing it required doing something she was not ready for. She was ready now. She looked at Anakin. He was standing slightly apart from the council, not seated, not officially part of this proceeding, there because he had found the truth and could not be excluded from the moment it was delivered. He looked back at her. His face said, "Stay," not in words. He was not saying it in words. But she knew him. She knew how he moved and thought and expressed the things he could not say directly, and his face said "stay" clearly enough that she heard it. She had disobeyed his orders before she had been right to. She looked at the council one more time. Then she turned. She walked toward the temple doorway, the great entrance, the threshold between the order and everything outside it, the boundary she had crossed for the first time as a small child being brought to begin her training. Her boots on the stone floor made a sound, a clean, even sound. Her own pace, not fast. She was not fleeing, not slow. She was not performing reluctance, just walking. The sound moved through the stone of the temple and did not echo back. She reached the threshold. She crossed it. The light outside was the full Coruscant Highwatch light. White, direct. The light of a city that did not soften anything. She walked into it. She did not look back. Anakin stood in the doorway. He watched her get smaller as she moved down the temple steps and into the city beyond. He watched until the crowd absorbed her, the ordinary Coruscant crowd, the civilians and workers and beings who had somewhere to be, and were getting there. She disappeared into it. He stood there. The council was still behind him. The chamber was still there. The amber light. The curved windows. The institution that had been his home since he was 9 years old. He stood in the doorway between these things and felt something that he had no current name for. He had felt it before, twice. The first time, he had been a boy on Tatooine, and his mother had let go of him at a landing pad, and he had walked up the ramp of a ship that was taking him away from her. He had looked back. She had been standing with her hands at her sides, and her face doing something complicated that she was trying to keep still for his benefit. He had not been able to stop that. The ship had lifted anyway. The second time was the night she died. The night she came back to him, and he could not hold on to her. The night he understood that some things could not be prevented by wanting them enough, by being strong enough, by arriving in time. Both times, the person left. Both times, he stayed. Both times, the distance between where he was standing and where they had gone was not measurable in any unit that meant anything. He stood in the doorway of the Jedi temple. The city swallowed the space where Ahsoka had been. He did not know, could not have known, standing there, that this moment was the one that would matter most. Not Geonosis, not Mortis, not any of the battles. This doorway, this specific grief, the one he would carry into everything that came next. He stood there for a while longer. Then he turned around. The war was still running. It always needed the next thing. He went back inside. Somewhere in the city below, Ahsoka walked. She had nowhere specific to be. This was new. For 3 years, there had always been somewhere specific to be. A briefing, a deployment, a mission, a debrief, another mission. The war had structured every hour. Now there was just the city. She walked through it. The Coruscant crowd moved around her, indifferent in the way large cities are indifferent. Too much motion to stop for any one person. Too many stories running simultaneously for any single story to interrupt the flow. She was not a Jedi anymore. She was not anything yet. This space, between what she had been and what came next, had no name in any tradition she had been trained in. She walked through it anyway, her boots on the Coruscant pavement. Not durasteel, not stone, just the city under her feet, solid and indifferent, and hers in the only way a city is anyone's. Because she was moving through it. Because she was alive. Because she had chosen this, even knowing she could have chosen otherwise. She kept walking. The city kept moving. The temple receded behind her. She did not look back. Two things happened at the same time. This is important. Not because the timing was coincidence. It was not coincidence. It was architecture, designed years in advance by a man who understood that the most effective traps are the ones where every exit leads to the same place. Two things happened simultaneously. On Mandalore, a siege began. On Coruscant, something ended. Neither event knew about the other. The people inside each one were focused entirely on what was directly in front of them. This is how it works. You are never aware of the larger shape while you are living inside one of its details. The shape only becomes visible afterward. By then, it is too late to step outside it. Ahsoka came back. Not to the Order, not to Anakin. She came back to the war because the war had come to find her. A message through Bail Organa, a situation that required someone with her specific knowledge of Mandalore and her specific relationship with the 501st. She met Rex at the staging area. He saw her coming across the landing bay and something shifted in his posture. Not dramatic, not a performance of relief. Just a small adjustment. The specific physical change of a person who has been slightly braced against something and has just been told they can stop. They stood across from each other. "Commander," he said. She was not a commander anymore. They both knew this. He said it anyway. She looked at him. She looked at the men behind him. The 501st, her battalion, the troopers she had fought alongside for 2 years. New faces in some positions, familiar ones in others. The same blue markings on the armor. She said, "It's good to see you, Rex." She meant it in a way that used up something. He heard that and nodded once and turned to the briefing, because there was a briefing and the mission was real, and this was how they both operated, through the work toward the next thing. Feelings filed where feelings went. But the thing that shifted in him when he saw her did not unshift. It stayed. The plan was this. Take Mandalore. Capture Maul. Maul had taken control of the planet through Deathwatch, the Mandalorian splinter group, the true believers in the old warrior culture. He had the city. He had the loyalty of enough armed people to make the city defensible. He had been waiting, not for the Republic, for something else, something he was not going to get, and he knew it. And this had made him dangerous in a new way. The specific danger of a person who has accepted a bad outcome and is now operating purely on what remains after acceptance. Ahsoka led the ground assault. Rex commanded beside her. The boots on Mandalore's streets were different from any previous campaign. The surface was urban, durasteel and stone. The sound sharp and specific, echoing between buildings in a way that open battlefields did not produce. You could hear yourself moving. You could hear everyone moving. The cities fought back. They found Maul in the tunnels beneath the capital. He had gone down rather than up when the siege tightened, into the old infrastructure, the waterways and maintenance corridors that ran under Sundari, like a second city nobody governed. Dark, confined, his territory now. Ahsoka went after him. Rex wanted to come. She told him to hold the outer positions. He looked at her. She looked back. He held the outer positions. The tunnel was narrow and lit by emergency strips along the floor. That specific blue-white of backup lighting, the color that meant the primary systems had already failed. Maul was waiting. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone who has been expecting a specific person and is now confirming that the right one arrived. He said, "I was hoping it would be you." She ignited her sabers. He did not ignite his. Not yet. He wanted to talk first. What Maul said in that tunnel was not a warning in the conventional sense. He was not trying to help her. This is the important distinction. He was a man who had spent years being used by Sidious, shaped, discarded, retrieved, used again. And he had arrived at a specific and bitter kind of knowledge about what Sidious was building and who was at the center of it. He said Anakin Skywalker was the key to everything. He said Sidious had chosen him, had been building toward him for years, that the war, all of it, every campaign, every death, every choice that had moved Anakin incrementally away from the Order and towards something else, was designed for this. For him, he said, it was already done. He said Ahsoka should run, not fight. That fighting here was irrelevant. That the thing she should be running toward was Anakin, and she was already too late. He said all of this with the flat delivery of someone reporting facts they find neither satisfying nor surprising. Then he ignited his saber. Ahsoka heard him, every word. She processed them with the combat-trained attention she had spent 3 years developing, the ability to receive information while simultaneously assessing threat and planning response. She heard him, and then she made a choice that she would not fully understand for a long time. She pushed it down, not because she didn't believe him, not because the words didn't land. They landed. She felt them land, a specific pressure in the chest, behind the sternum, the physical sensation of information that costs something to hold. She pushed it down because the alternative was to hold it. And holding it meant stopping. And stopping meant the siege collapsed, and Rex's position was exposed, and the mission failed, and Mandalore stayed in Maul's hands. She had learned this from Anakin, not as a lesson, never as a lesson, but by watching him do it for 2 years. The filing, the sealing, the moving forward because the mission required forward. She pushed it down. She fought. The fight was the hardest of her life. Not because Maul was stronger, he was technically in raw power, but she was faster, and she was angry in the specific way that competent people are angry when they are fighting something they cannot afford to lose to. The anger did not destabilize her, it focused her. She won, not a clean win, a costly one. The kind where you are still standing at the end, but standing is all you can claim. Maul was captured. She stood over him in the tunnel, breathing hard, the blue-white emergency lighting casting everything in that cold, flat tone. He looked up at her. He said, "You have no idea what you've done." She did not answer. She did not answer because she was afraid that she did. On Coruscant, Anakin Skywalker sat across from Palpatine. The Chancellor's office was everything it had always been. High windows, the Coruscant skyline behind them, the specific quality of authority that a room accumulates when important decisions have been made in it for decades. Palpatine looked at him, not with the warmth he had always performed. Something more direct, more honest in its way than anything he had ever shown Anakin before. He told him what he was: Sith, Darth Sidious, the Architect. He said it plainly, not as confession, as revelation, as the moment when the thing that had been present all along finally became visible. Anakin sat with this. The narrator slows here, not to show manipulation. The manipulation was already complete, had been complete for years. Every conversation and every gift of attention and every careful question asked at the right moment of grief had been building toward exactly this. The manipulation does not need to be shown because it already happened in the space between every previous chapter. What the narrator slows on is the acceptance. Anakin accepting. Palpatine offered him the one thing the war and the order and every relationship in his life had failed to give him. Not power, not knowledge, though he offered knowledge. Certainty. The certainty that loss was not inevitable. That the thing he feared most, the specific fear that had lived in him since a landing pad on Tatooine, since arms that went still in a hut in the Tusken camp, since a doorway in the Jedi temple where boots made a sound that did not echo back, that this fear had a solution. That he could prevent it, that the dark side carried knowledge that could stop death itself. Anakin had heard this before. He had declined before. He did not decline now. Not with a speech, not with a dramatic moment of decision. He just received it. The way you receive something you have been refusing for a long time and have finally run out of the energy to keep refusing. He received it. And something that had been slightly open in him for years closed quietly. The first decision. He went to Mace Windu. He told him that Palpatine was a Sith Lord. He gave him the information. He fulfilled the Jedi obligation. He reported what he knew to the Council's senior member. What he did not tell Windu, that he needed Palpatine alive. Not for the Republic, not for the war, for Padme. He told the truth with a piece removed from it. This was not the first time he had done this, but it was the first time the removed piece was this large. Windu took the information and moved. Anakin stood and watched him go. The second decision. Windu went to arrest the Chancellor with 3 other masters. Anakin stood in the antechamber. He stood there for a period of time the records cannot precisely establish. Long enough for Windu to reach the office. Long enough for the confrontation to begin. Long enough for him to make the choice that was not a choice. That was the destination every previous small compromise had been building toward. The place, all those closed exits had been funneling him since Geonosis, since Tatooine, since the first decision he made that he did not tell anyone about. He walked into the office. Windu had Palpatine at the window's edge. Palpatine was making himself look broken, hunched, diminished, the performance of a man spent. Windu's blade was raised. Anakin said, "Don't." Windu said, "He's too dangerous to be left alive." Anakin looked at Palpatine. He looked at the only person who had ever offered him the specific thing he needed. He raised his own blade. One motion. Windu's hand. The window. The long fall into the Coruscant dark. The third decision. He knelt. This is the simplest fact of what happened, and it contains everything. He knelt in front of the man he had just protected, in the ruins of the office, in the silence after the window and the fall. And he received a name. Darth Vader. He said nothing in response. He did not need to. The name was not given to him. It was recognized in him. The thing he had been becoming, the direction all those small decisions had been pointing, finally had a word. He received it. The man who had stood in a doorway, watching Ahsoka walk away, was not the man kneeling here. He was not even sure when the transition happened. This was the nature of the drift. You could not find the moment because there was no moment. There was only the accumulation, and then the arrival at a place so far from the start that the start was no longer visible. He breathed. The name settled. He rose. Above Mandalore, in a Republic cruiser, Ahsoka stood at a viewport. The siege had succeeded. Maul was in custody. The mission was complete by every official measure. Rex found her at the viewport. He stood beside her without speaking. This was something they had learned together over 2 years. The specific comfort of presence without demand. Of someone standing near you without requiring you to be anything other than what you currently were. She was looking at the stars. He looked at them too. Then she felt it. Not heard. Not saw. Felt. Something changed in the Force. It was not a sound, and it was not a vision, and it was not anything she could have described to anyone who asked her about it later. It was a change in the quality of something she had always felt as constant, a frequency she had lived inside since childhood, as familiar as her own heartbeat. And then it was different. Not gone. Different. Like a voice she had known for years, saying something in a register it had never used before. She went very still. Rex looked at her. She did not look back at him. She was looking at the stars, and she was very still, and her face was doing something complicated that she was not trying to control, because whatever had just moved through the Force was too large for the management of expressions. Rex said, "Commander." She did not answer immediately. When she did, she said, "Something happened." He waited. She had no other words. She did not know what had happened. She knew only the shape of it, that it was enormous, that it was wrong, that it was connected to something she had pushed down in a tunnel on Mandalore, and that the name of what she had felt was not in any language she had been given. She stood at the viewport. The stars did not change. The Force did not change back. In the ruins of the Chancellor's office on Coruscant, Darth Vader breathed. One breath. Steady. The breath of someone who has arrived somewhere after a long journey and is not yet moving again. The office was quiet. The window was open to the Coruscant night. Somewhere below, the city moved, as it always moved. The traffic, the levels, the millions of lives operating in their ordinary channels, unaware of what had just happened in a room above them. The Republic still existed. For now. A few more hours. Then it would have a different name too. Everything was about to have a different name. This is what the drift had been building toward. Not a war. Not a victory. A name. One name, kneeling in an office, breathing in the dark. It took less than a second. That is the first thing to understand. The signal traveled through the GAR's command network at the speed of encrypted transmission. Faster than sound, faster than thought, faster than any biological process except the one it was designed to trigger. Less than a second from transmission to reception. Less than a second from reception to activation. The chip was small. Grown into the base of the skull during the cloning process. Never mentioned in any briefing. Never listed in any equipment manifest. Never explained to the men who carried it inside their own heads for their entire lives. It was always there, waiting for one word. The word came, Felucia. The planet was jungle, dense, coloured in purples and yellows that had no equivalent anywhere in the core. The fungi were taller than buildings. The The air was warm and thick and smelled like something growing constantly in every direction. Isla Secura had been stationed here for 11 months. Her unit had been with her for most of that time. A specific cohort, experienced, efficient, the kind of cloned soldiers who had developed the particular attentiveness of people who had worked alongside a Jedi long enough to anticipate how she moved. One of them had learned her name in Twi'leki, CT-6922. No nickname. He had not settled on one yet. He was considering it, had been considering it for a few weeks, had several options in rotation. He had learned her name because it seemed like the correct form of respect. She used his designation number precisely and without condescension, which was more than many officers managed. He thought learning her name in her own language was an equivalent gesture. He never told her he had done this. He said it privately, internally, the way the third name was carried, as something that belonged to him, a form of acknowledgement that required no recipient. He said her name in Twi'leki when the signal came. He did not know he was saying it. His weapon came up. She was ahead of him on the path, moving through the jungle growth with the easy forward momentum of someone who trusted the people behind her. She trusted them. They were her unit. The shot came from behind. Multiple shots. His and his brother's. Simultaneous. The trained coordination of men who had drilled for this geometry, without ever being told they were drilling for this geometry. She fell. CT-6922 stood in the jungle of Felucia, with his weapon raised, and her name in Twi'leki, somewhere behind his eyes, and no mechanism to connect those two facts. The chip had taken the connection apart. The jungle was very loud after. The fungi did not register what had happened. The warm, thick air kept moving. Maijito. Ice World. The battle there had been ongoing for months. One of the war's long, grinding campaigns that never fully resolved, that existed in a permanent state of managed attrition. Ki-Adi-Mundi had been leading the assault on a bridge position when the signal came. He turned. He turned because he felt it. Jedi often had a fraction of a second, sometimes less. Not enough to survive, enough to see. He saw his men. Their faces were not visible through the helmets. He could not read their expressions. He had never been able to read their expressions. The armor was designed to prevent that, practically speaking, though no one had ever framed it in those terms. He had learned to read other signals. Posture, movement, the specific quality of stillness before action. He read them now. He knew what was coming. He did not run. There was nowhere to run that was not also full of his men. He raised his blades. He was a Jedi master. He fought until he couldn't. The bridge was very cold. The ice did not warm after. Kato Nemoidia. Plo Koon was flying. This is important because of what it means. That in the last moments, he was doing something he was genuinely good at. Something that required his full attention and gave him genuine satisfaction. He was not in a briefing or a diplomatic session or a conversation that required careful navigation. He was flying. His wingmen came up on either side of him. His own fighters. His own unit. The shots came from the flanking positions. The geometry of it precise. The angle calculated to prevent evasion. His own men understanding his flying well enough to know exactly where to be. His ship went down over the city. The city had no record of what happened to him afterward. The narrator has no record either. This gap is genuine. What Plo Koon experienced in the final seconds, what a Jedi Master felt in the Force when the Force was the only thing left to feel, is not documented and cannot be reconstructed. It is one of the war's honest silences. Saleokami. Commander Steck's unit was in the field when the signal came. Steck was not notable in the official records. He had not distinguished himself with any particular heroism or any particular failure. He had served. He had been reliable. His men trusted him in the specific way that men trust a commander who has never spent them carelessly, who has always brought back more than the mission required. When the signal came, Steck raised his weapon with his brothers. Then he stopped, not fully, not completely. Something, a hesitation, a fraction of a second longer than the others, something moved through him that the chip could not fully account for. It was not enough to refuse. It was not enough to warn the Jedi he served. But it was there, a fraction of a second of something that the programming had not predicted. The narrator cannot name it precisely. Only note that it existed, that even in the worst moment of the worst design, something in a man who had been grown for obedience produced a fraction of a second of something else. It was not enough. It never is in these moments. But it was there. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The 501st came, not all of them. A selected force, those assigned to Coruscant garrison, those whose deployment made them available for this specific operation. They came in through the main entrance. The great doors opened. The temple guards were the first. Then the Jedi who came to the sound of fighting, drawn by the noise, by the disturbance in the force, by the training that said move toward the danger rather than away. In the upper halls, a Padawan heard boots. She was 12 years old. She had been in the middle of something ordinary, a practice sequence in one of the smaller training rooms, the kind of work that is done alone and requires concentration, and was absorbing enough that she had not immediately registered the sounds from below. Then she heard them. Boots on the temple stone, many pairs, moving fast, the rhythm wrong. The boots she had grown up hearing in these halls had a specific quality, the pace of people with somewhere to be, but no urgency driving them, the sound of an institution that had been operating in the same rhythms for 1,000 years. These were not those boots. She turned toward the sound. She did not know what she was turning toward. She had grown up here. She had never been afraid here. She turned. The door opened. The narrator does not continue past this point, not because the record ends here. Because there are things that the narrator cannot describe and still ask the listener to stay in the room. She was 12 years old. She turned toward the door. That is the last thing that needs to be said. Mandalore. The chapter pauses here. It stays here longer than anywhere else. The signal reached Mandalore's clone complement at the same moment it reached every other unit across the galaxy, less than a second from transmission to activation. Rex was in the forward position with Ahsoka when it came. She was ahead of him. She was talking, something operational. The next phase of the Maul containment, the logistics of moving a high-value prisoner on a ship that was not designed for high-value prisoner transport. She was talking, and he was listening with the attention he had always given her. Full attention, the kind that tracks not just the words, but the thinking behind them, that anticipates the next point before it arrives because you know how this person's mind moves. He knew how her mind moved. He had known for 2 years. The chip activated. What happened in Rex between the activation and the action is not fully documented. This is an honest gap, not a narrative choice, an actual absence in the record. What is documented? A slight delay, longer than the other units. A pause that the chip's design had not predicted and could not account for. What the narrator believes happened in that pause, based on everything that preceded it. 3 years arrived simultaneously, not as memory, not as images or sequences, as weight. The accumulated weight of everything Rex had built inside the structure of the chip's programming. The third name carried silently, the report from Umbara that he did not believe, the fraction of a second before the order to cross the field. CT-4774's stones, the palm pressed against Geonosis durasteel, the corridor on Kamino vibrating under his boots, Ahsoka in the landing bay, the thing that shifted in him when he saw her arrive, the first deployment, the last briefing, 63 names, all of it, in the space between activation and action. The chip was not designed for a person this complex. The Kaminoans had been thorough. They had not been thorough enough. His weapon came up. Ahsoka turned. She had felt it, that same Jedi sensitivity that gave a fraction of a second, sometimes less. She turned and she saw Rex, and she saw the weapon, and she did something that the narrator cannot fully account for either. She did not run. She looked at him. She looked at Rex specifically, not at the weapon, not at the threat geometry, not at the tactical situation, at Rex, at the person she had known for 2 years, the person who had called her commander when she was no longer a commander, the person who had stood at the viewport with her when the Force changed and had not asked her to explain what she felt. She looked at him, and something in Rex, the same something that had produced the delay, the same accumulated weight of 3 years of becoming a specific person, held for just long enough. Not long enough to overcome the chip, long enough to do the one thing that remained available to him. He warned her, not in words, in everything else, in the specific quality of a person fighting themselves and losing, in the signal of a man who knows what is coming and cannot stop it but can give her 1 more second. She understood immediately. She moved. She got the chip out. The details of how, the trap, the medical bay, the specific sequence that got Rex into a position where the chip could be removed, are documented elsewhere and are not the point. The point is this. Rex had built, over 3 years, a self complex enough to fight its own biology for 1 second. 1 second was enough. Ahsoka survived. The narrator does not present this as triumph. It is not triumph. It is the most expensive victory of the war. A man's entire accumulation of personhood, everything he had become across 3 years of becoming, spent in a single moment to prevent one death. It worked. It cost everything it cost. Both things are true. When it was over, when the chip was gone, and Rex was himself again, in the way that you are yourself after surviving something that tried to make you into something else, he stood in the medical bay, and he was very still. Ahsoka was there. She did not touch him. She did not speak immediately. She understood correctly that there was no correct thing to say. She just stayed. This was what she had. Presence, proximity, the willingness to stay in the room while someone stood inside something terrible. Rex stood. He breathed. He was thinking about his brothers, not the ones who had been stopped like him, the ones who had not been stopped, the ones across the galaxy right now, in the jungle of Felucia and the ice of Mygeeto and the corridors of the Jedi Temple, doing the thing the chip had designed them to do, because nothing in their 3 years had built a complex enough person to fight it for 1 second. His brothers, with his face, following an order they could not refuse. He stood in the medical bay, and he thought about all of them. And he did not say anything, because the thing he was thinking was too large for any word he had. The galaxy sounded different in the Force. This is not metaphor. Jedi who survived Order 66, the ones who felt it in the field before the shots came, the ones who were far enough from their units to run, reported afterward that the Force produced a sound, not audible, not a physical frequency, something underneath physical frequency, something that the Force conducted the way Durasteel conducted vibration, through the material of the thing itself. It sounded like subtraction, like a number being reduced rapidly, like something that had been present in the Force in thousands of points across the galaxy being removed from those points simultaneously. Not silence. The absence that comes before silence. The moment when the sound stops and the silence has not yet arrived, and you are standing in the space between them, and you understand, in that space, exactly what you are about to hear. The planet's surfaces were quiet after. Each one. Felucia's jungle, Mygeeto's ice, Cato Nemoidia's clouds, the stone of the Jedi Temple. Each one quiet in its own way. The specific silence of a place where something has just happened that the place has no framework for. The clones stood in these silences. Some of them had the third name. The narrator does not know which ones. The narrator does not know if the third name helped. The narrator suspects that it did not, that in the moment of activation, the third name went wherever the rest of the self went, into the space behind the chip where nothing the person had built could reach. The narrator suspects this, but cannot confirm it. This is an honest gap, like Plo Koon's final seconds, like CT-1477's 3 seconds looking at the sky over Geonosis, like the thing Rex experienced between activation and the warning he gave Ahsoka. The gaps are real. They're not filled. A weapon was lowered on Mandalore, a planet surface, not jungle or ice or cloud. Durasteel and stone, the surface of a world that had been fighting over its own identity for generations and was now quiet. Rex and Ahsoka, one who had almost killed the other, one who had almost died. They looked at each other. The narrator notes, they did not speak, not because there was nothing to say, because there was nothing large enough. The war had given them a vocabulary for tactics, for mission parameters, for the logistics of survival. It had not given them a vocabulary for this. They stood in the quiet. The boots were still. The Durasteel was cold. Above them, somewhere in the dark between planets, the Force was still conducting its subtraction, still registering what was being removed from it, still feeling each point of light go out. They stood. They breathed. That was enough for now. That was all that was available. The Empire announced itself on a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered. Days had stopped mattering in the way they used to matter. As markers of something, as the container for a specific kind of ordinary life that had its own rhythm and its own small expectations. The announcement came through every speaker, on every Republic world, simultaneously. The HoloNet carried it. The Senate chamber carried it first. The source, the origin point, the room where it happened in front of the people who had spent their careers believing that rooms like that one were where democracy lived. Palpatine stood at the podium. He did not look like a man revealing a deception. He looked like a man who had been waiting a very long time to say something true and had finally been given the occasion. He spoke about security, about unity, about the threats that the Republic's fragmented structure had been unable to address. He used the word Republic 3 times in the first 2 minutes. Each time he used it, it meant something slightly different than it had the time before. By the 3rd time, it meant nothing. The Senate chamber applauded. Padme Amidala did not applaud. She sat in her Senate pod, and she listened, and her face did something that the people near her would describe differently depending on who was asked. Some said she looked devastated. Some said she looked unsurprised. Both were correct. She had been watching this come for 2 years. She had said so in rooms that were not this room, to people who were not in this chamber. She had written legislation that tried to slow it. She had built coalitions that tried to redirect it. She had believed, for longer than was probably rational, that the institutions she had given her life to were capable of self-correction. She sat in her pod, and she listened to the word Republic used as camouflage for its opposite. And she understood, with the specific clarity that arrives when something you have been dreading finally becomes real, that the institutions had not self-corrected, that they had not self-corrected, because the thing that needed correcting had been making the corrections. Bail Organa sat nearby. He was not watching the podium. He was watching the chamber, the faces, the applause moving through the room like a wave, who joined it quickly, who joined it slowly, who sat with their hands in their laps. He was already thinking about what came next. He was very good at thinking about what came next. He would need to be. Ahsoka was not in the Senate chamber. She was in the outer rim when the announcement came through, on a transport between systems, one of the civilian routes that still operated between smaller worlds where the war had been felt as distant rumble rather than direct impact. She heard it through a public speaker in a transport bay. She was sitting with her back against a wall, her pack between her feet, her hood pulled forward in the specific way of someone who does not want to be recognized and has learned, recently and quickly, how to make themselves visually unremarkable. She listened to Palpatine's voice. She thought about Maul in the tunnel. She thought about what he had said. She thought about how she had pushed it down. She did not think about this for long. She had learned to limit how long she spent in certain directions of thought. Not suppression, exactly, but a practical management of what she could afford to feel while she was in a transport bay, with nowhere specific to go and no structure supporting her survival except herself. She pulled her hood a little further forward. The transport bay kept moving around her. Nobody looked at her. This was the first useful thing she had learned in the week since Mandalore. How to be nobody. She had nothing. This is not a description of emotional state. It is a practical inventory. No lightsabers. She had left them. A deliberate choice, made in the first hours after Order 66, when she understood what the sabers meant now, what carrying them would advertise about what she was, in a galaxy that had just declared what she was to be a threat. No rank, no designation, no institutional backing of any kind, no name that was safe to use continuously. She moved through the early weeks under different names in different places. Not aliases she had prepared, just names she borrowed from context, from what the situation required, shed and replaced as she moved. No credits initially, then some, earned through work that did not require explanation. Physical work, mostly. The kind that paid in cash at the end of the day and asked no questions because the employer was also doing something they preferred not to document. She was good at physical work. The war had been thorough in its preparation. She ate what she could find. This sounds simple. It was not simple. The Outer Rim's food economy operated on a combination of local production and supply chains that the war had disrupted in ways that had not yet been repaired, and might not be repaired now that the new government had different priorities for different regions. In some places, she ate well. Market food, fresh enough, bought with days' wages, eaten alone in corners of public spaces where eating alone was normal enough not to attract attention. In other places, she ate poorly. Preserved rations, the kind that sustained without satisfying, the kind that the clone army had lived on in the field, and that she had eaten enough of to recognize by smell. She did not complain about the food. She had learned this from Rex, from watching him in the field, the absence of complaint about physical conditions that were objectively bad. Not performed stoicism, just a practical redirection of energy away from what could not be changed toward what could. She ate what was available. She kept moving. She slept in places she did not have to pay for. This was harder than the food. There were systems for this, informal networks among people who operated outside the economy's official layer, who had learned to extend and receive shelter without transaction. She found these networks by feel, by the specific attention she had developed for reading situations and people quickly. She was good at this too. The war had been thorough. She slept in storage rooms, in the back areas of businesses whose owners had decided not to ask questions, in the kind of shared accommodation that existed in outer rim port cities, for people who were between things and needed somewhere horizontal and safe for a few hours. She did not sleep deeply. She had not slept deeply since Mandalore. She was not sure she would again. She did not use the Force unless she had to. And sometimes she had to. A situation that was about to turn dangerous before the danger was visible to anyone else. A calculation that needed to be right the first time. A moment when someone's safety required something she could not provide with her hands alone. She used it when she had to. Afterwards, she sat very still for a while. Not from guilt, not from fear of detection, exactly. From the specific experience of touching something that had recently felt entirely different and finding it still present, still functioning, still the same quiet current it had always been, and not knowing how to reconcile that with everything that had been done in its name by people who had lived inside it the same way she did. The Force had not changed. Everything else had. She sat with this. She did not resolve it. She got up and kept moving. Rex found her on Selokami. Or she found him. The mechanics of it were complicated and involved a contact and a coded message and a meeting point that was technically a loading dock and was in practice the most private location either of them had access to. He looked different. Not physically. His face was his face, identical to every clone face. The face she had known for 2 years. But something in how he carried it was different. The armor was gone. He wore civilian clothes with the specific discomfort of someone who has spent their entire life in uniform and is now operating without it. He looked at her. She looked at him. They did not say anything immediately. This was still their language. The shared presence. The willingness to occupy the same space without filling it with words that were not adequate. After a while, she said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Me neither." They traveled together for a while. Rex introduced himself by his name. This sounds ordinary. It was not ordinary. In the first days after Mandalore, in the first interactions with civilians who had no context for what a clone trooper was outside of military deployment, he had 2 options for how to identify himself. His designation, the number, the system the Republic had used. CT-7567. Efficient, accurate. The identifier that every piece of official documentation associated with him, or his name. Rex. He chose his name. Every time. In every interaction. In the loading dock on Selokami, and in the transit station on the next world, and in the small conversations that survival in the Outer Rim required. The quick exchanges with vendors, with other travelers, with the people whose cooperation he needed for specific and practical reasons. Rex. It was an act of defiance so quiet that it produced no visible resistance. No one stopped him. No one corrected him. No one told him that his designation was the accurate identifier and his name was informal. And informal identifiers were not how the system worked. The system was not there to say any of this. He said his name into the absence of the system. He said it every time. He never knew anyone noticed. Ahsoka noticed. She noticed the first time and every subsequent time, and she said nothing about it because saying something about it would have made it a thing that was being observed rather than a thing being freely done. She let him do it freely. She kept noticing. They did not talk about Order 66 directly. They talked around it, the logistics of what had happened, the practical consequences, the information they each carried about the galaxy's new shape and what surviving inside that shape would require. They talked about the Empire, about what it controlled and what it was still consolidating, about the routes that were safe and the ones that were not, about the people who might be trusted and the systems for determining trust quickly when you did not have time for the slower methods. They talked about everything that was immediately useful. And in the space around all of this practical talking, the other thing existed. The thing on Mandalore, the chip, the second between activation and warning. The fact that she was alive because of what he had spent. It existed. Neither of them named it. They did not need to name it to carry it. They had learned this too. On one of the last nights they traveled together, Ahsoka woke in the early hours and could not go back to sleep. This was not unusual. She sat up. The shelter they were using, a storage facility, abandoned, the previous tenant's equipment still stacked along the walls, was dark except for the ambient light of whatever city or settlement was outside the high windows. Rex was asleep nearby. She watched him sleep. She thought about the fact that he was aging faster than her, that his biology ran at double speed, that the face she was looking at, the one she had known for 2 years, the one that was also every clone face but was also specifically and only his, would age out of recognition while she was still in the middle of her own life. She thought about this for a while. Then she stopped thinking about it, because there was nothing to do with the thought, and she needed to sleep. She lay back down. The city outside was quiet. She did not sleep for a long time. They separated on a planet the narrator does not name, not dramatically. Not with a scene that required witness. The logistics of survival had been pointing them in different directions for a while. Rex had a contact to the south, someone who might know where other surviving clones were, brothers who had gotten their chips out or who had been far enough from their units when the signal came to run before it reached them. He needed to go south. Ahsoka needed to go the other direction. They stood at the junction point. Rex looked at her. He started to say something. He stopped. She shook her head slightly, not stopping him from speaking, more releasing him from the obligation of it, from the requirement that this moment be framed in language that would inevitably be insufficient. He nodded. He understood. He turned south. He walked. She watched him go. Before he turned, he counted, not aloud, internally. The way the third name was carried, in the private space that no external system could access. He counted his brothers, the ones he could remember by name, not designation, name. The names they had given themselves and each other over 3 years, the informal catalogue of people who had become specific through proximity and trust, and the particular intimacy of shared survival. Fives. Echo, Hardcase, Tup, Dogma, Jesse. He counted. He got to 63. He knew there were more. He knew the number was wrong, too low, not representative, a partial accounting of a catalogue that should have been larger. He did not try for 64. Not because 64 was too many, because 63 was already more than he could hold, without the holding becoming something that stopped him moving. He filed it. He kept it. He walked south. Ahsoka walked the other way, into the outer rim night, the specific darkness of a world far enough from its sun, that the night was genuinely dark, not the ambient half-light of a developed city, but real dark, the kind that required your eyes to adjust before you could see the ground in front of you. She adjusted. She walked. She thought about many things, and then she thought about fewer things, and then she thought about the one thing she had been not thinking about since the tunnel on Mandalore. Anakin, not Darth Vader. She did not have that name yet. She did not know the name. She knew only the shift she had felt in the force above Mandalore, the change in frequency that had no word. She thought about him, the man who had looked at her across a war zone when she was 14, and said, "I didn't ask for this," and meant it, and then taught her everything anyway. The man who had looked at her in the council chamber doorway with a face that said, "Stay." She thought about where he was now. She did not know. She knew the direction, toward power, toward the center of the new thing that had replaced the old thing, away from her. She thought about the distance. She thought about when the distance had started. She could not find the exact moment. It had been gradual. The way all the important changes in this war had been gradual. Drift rather than break. Accumulation rather than decision. She could not find the moment. She walked into the dark. The night was very quiet. Somewhere in that same dark, moving in the opposite direction toward Coruscant. Toward the seat of a power she could not yet name. Something that used to be Anakin Skywalker was also moving. The distance between them was already large. It would only grow. Neither of them knew exactly when it had stopped being bridgeable. The narrator does not know either. This is the honest answer. Some distances do not have a measurable origin. They simply become visible one day when you look up and realize that the other person is no longer close enough to reach. She walked. The dark held her. The stars above were the same stars that had been above Geonosis, above Kamino, above Mandalore. They did not arrange themselves into meaning. They were just light, old light, traveling from somewhere it used to be towards somewhere it was going. Nobody came back to this battlefield. That is the first thing, not the politics, not the names, not the large historical framing that would eventually be written about what happened and why and who was responsible and what it meant for the galaxy's future. Just this, a field somewhere in the outer rim that nobody came back to. The crater lines were still visible. The soil had been broken open by ordnance and had not yet closed back over itself. The ground too disturbed, the root systems too damaged, the slow work of recovery not yet far enough along to hide what had happened here. Empty ammunition casings in the dirt, thousands of them. The small brass-coloured cylinders that blaster rifles ejected after each discharge, scattered across the field in a pattern that, if you could read it, would tell you exactly where the lines had been and which direction the fighting had moved and where the pressure had been highest. You could read it. Rex could have read it if he had been here. He was not here. Nobody was here. That was the point. If you pressed your palm flat against the soil of this field, flat against the broken ground, the way you might press a palm against Durasteel to feel the engines, you would feel nothing. Not silence. Nothing. These are different things. Silence is what remains after sound stops. Silence still has the shape of sound in it. The echo, the memory of frequency. The air still carrying the impression of what it recently held. Nothing is what's left when enough time has passed that even the echo is gone. This field was not at nothing yet. It was at the stage just before nothing. The stage where the silence still knew what it used to contain. The Clone Wars lasted 3 years. In those 3 years, the Republic deployed an army of approximately 1 million clones across hundreds of worlds. The historian's number, the official accounting, it does not capture the thing it is trying to count. 1 million is a number that the mind cannot hold as people. The mind converts it into a figure, a statistic, a quantity, the kind of data point that appears in documents and is processed as information, rather than felt as weight. What the narrator asks instead, one face. The face that was on every one of them. The template. Jango Fett's face, replicated 1 million times, each replication developing into a specific person through the irreducible process of living. The experiences, the choices, the accumulated texture of 3 years of war, building different people out of identical starting material. One face, 1 million different people, every one of them called by a number first, most of them called by a name eventually, at least informally, at least by the brothers who knew them, some of them carrying internally a third name, gone now, most of them gone. The numbers inactive in a system that had moved on to the next accounting. The Empire integrated the surviving clones into its new military structure. This happened quickly, efficiently. The GAR's organizational framework was adapted rather than replaced. The bones of the Republic's army were useful, and the Empire was practical about useful things. The clones continued to serve. They wore new armor, white still, but the markings different, the insignia changed. The color-coded unit identifications that had allowed brothers to find each other across a battlefield gradually standardized into something more uniform and less personal. The chips were removed, not as mercy, as obsolescence. The Sith commanded directly now. The Emperor above, Vader below, the chain of authority running through dark side power rather than through biological programming. The chips had served their purpose. They were decommissioned. The clones whose chips were removed after Order 66 had no way to know what the chip had made them do. The records were sealed. Most of them never knew. The narrator does not know if this was better or worse than knowing. The narrator suspects it was both at different times for different men. Some clones deserted. Not many. The conditioning was thorough and the opportunities were limited, and the Empire's intelligence apparatus was effective at locating and recovering assets that left without authorization. But some, they slipped away in the confusion of the transition period, when the GAR was becoming the Imperial Army, and the administrative machinery was consuming itself, reorganizing, and the gaps between systems were briefly larger than they would later become. They went to the outer rim, to the margins, to the worlds that were too small and too poor and too far from the center to attract sustained Imperial attention. They lived there. They aged. This is the part that the narrator holds longest. The accelerated aging, the thing the Kaminoans had built into them, the double-speed biological clock that had never been explained to them and had never been apologized for, continued after the war. A clone who had fought at Geonosis in Year Zero was, biologically, in his mid-40s by the time the war ended 3 years later. He looked like a man in his mid-40s. He felt like a man in his mid-40s. The people around him, the civilians of whatever outer rim world he had found, aged at the normal rate. They grew old slowly, the way people were supposed to grow old. He grew old fast. He was visibly aging out of the face everyone expected him to maintain. The template, Jango Fett's face, drifting into something else, not different, just older, and then very old, faster than anyone near him was prepared for. He died among strangers, not because the strangers were unkind, because the accelerated clock did not allow time to become anything other than a stranger to most people he met. There was not enough time. There had never been enough time. The Kaminoans had made them quickly, and the galaxy had used them quickly, and even the years left after the war ran faster than they should have. He died. Someone who knew him briefly closed his eyes. No record was made. The Jedi scattered. This is the word that appears in the accounts, scattered. And it is accurate in the physical sense. They went in every direction. They went alone, mostly, because traveling in groups created a visibility that individual survival required against. They went to the outer rim, to agricultural worlds, to places where force sensitivity was not known to be detectable, and where a person with no history could build a small, quiet life around whatever skills they had that were not specifically Jedi skills. Some of them made it. Some of them were found. The Inquisitors came later, the Empire's hunters. Former Jedi turned against the Order, sent to locate and eliminate what remained. Efficient, methodical, patient in the way that institutional power is patient when it does not need to hurry. The survivors grew smaller in number. The ones who remained became very good at being invisible. They were not hiding from fear alone. Some of them were hiding because they understood, or came to understand in the long, quiet years, that surviving was itself a form of service, that staying alive kept something alive, that the galaxy might someday need what they carried. They waited. They did not know how long they would have to wait. They waited anyway. This is perhaps the bravest thing anyone did in the entire war. Not the battles, not the sieges, not the last stands. The waiting. The patient, anonymous, structureless waiting of people who had lost everything except the decision to remain. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant became an imperial building. The change was administrative at first, a reclassification in the city's property records. The temple's ownership transferred from the Jedi Order to the office of the Emperor. Then it became physical. The interior was altered, the meditation halls repurposed, the training rooms converted. The library, the ancient, irreplaceable library, 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge stored in formats that only the Order's own systems could fully access, was locked, catalogued by Imperial archivists who understood some of what they were handling, and not all of it. The light through the curved windows remained the same. The windows did not know what had happened. Stone does not update its relationship to light based on who occupies the rooms below. The amber light came in at the same angle it had always come in. There was no one left to sit in it. Obi-Wan Kenobi went to Tatooine. He went because a child needed watching. Because Bail Organa had made a plan in the days after Order 66, in the urgent and grief-compressed thinking of a man who understood what had been lost and was already working on what came next. The plan required someone on Tatooine, someone with nothing else to do except watch and wait. Obi-Wan had nothing else to do. He went. He took the name Ben. A small shift, close enough to his own name that it would answer to, different enough to not appear in a search. He settled. He watched the moisture farm on the edge of the Yundland wastes. The family there. The boy. He did not interfere. He had been told not to interfere, and he agreed that not interfering was correct, and he maintained this position through years of watching the boy grow. He sat in a small house in the desert. The desert was quiet. He had time to think about everything. He thought about many things. He thought about a young man he had trained who had stopped being that young man. He thought about where the failure was, in himself, in the Order, in the specific decisions he had made or made too late. He did not reach a clean conclusion. The desert did not offer clean conclusions. It offered time and heat and the slow movement of days that looked the same and were not the same. He waited. Yoda went to Dagobah. Dagobah was swamp and darkness and a vergence in the Force, a cave on the south side of the main landmass, where the dark side pooled in a way that was old and settled and paradoxically clarifying. You could feel the dark side clearly there. You could look at it directly. This was the point. Yoda went to the one place in the galaxy where the dark side was completely visible, and he sat next to it, and he learned to look at it without flinching. He had 900 years of wisdom, and he sat in a swamp and learned something new. This is worth noting. 900 years, and the galaxy still had new things to teach. He communed with Qui-Gon Jinn, the Dead Master, the voice that persisted in the Force. The first Jedi to have learned the path of conscious survival after death. Yoda learned what Qui-Gon knew. He learned slowly, in the way that things worth learning take time. He sat in the swamp. The dark cave was nearby. He looked at it every day. He waited. Bail Organa went home to Alderaan. He brought a baby, Leia. He and Breha raised her as their own, as the princess of a core world, a planet of culture and education and a particular kind of civic idealism that Alderaan had maintained through the Clone Wars, and was now maintaining through the Empire, with the specific discipline of people who understood that the alternative was losing something irreplaceable. Bail knew what he was raising, not entirely. He did not know what she would become. No one did, including her, but he knew she was important. He knew the Force had its reasons. He had faith in this without being Force-sensitive himself, which is its own kind of courage. He went home. He raised his daughter. He started building the thing that would come next. He was patient about it. He had learned patience from watching a democracy eat itself from the inside over 2 years, while he watched and argued and voted and was unable to stop it. Patience was not something he had chosen. It was something the war had made mandatory. He used it. Anakin Skywalker did not exist anymore. The narrator pauses here, not to dramatize it, not to assign it more weight than it already carries, just to say it plainly, because it is the plainest and most important fact of the Clone Wars aftermath. Anakin Skywalker, the boy from Tatooine, the one who loved flying, the way other people loved breathing, the one who had loved Padme with an intensity that frightened him, the one who had stood in the arena on Geonosis and been proud and afraid at the same moment, the one who had looked at a 14-year-old girl in a war zone and taught her everything anyway. He did not exist anymore. Darth Vader did. The armor came later, the respirator, the suit, the black that became so associated with the name that it seemed like the name required the black. But Vader existed before the armor. The name was taken first. The armor was simply the external form that matched the internal fact. The narrator pauses here on the name, Darth Vader. 2 words. And then the narrator says only this. The distance between Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader is the entire story of the Clone Wars. Not the battles, not the politics, not the Senate votes or the military campaigns or the body counts or the territorial gains and losses that the historians would argue about for generations. The distance between one name and another. That distance, measured not in parsecs but in choices, in small decisions that each felt reasonable, in grief that was never properly held, in love that had nowhere safe to go, in an institution that asked too much and explained too little and failed the person it was most responsible for at the moment he most needed it not to fail him. That distance is the war. Everything else is just the context in which it opened. The galaxy kept moving. This is what galaxies do. The ordinary lives, the ones that had continued through the war in the background of every battle. The farmers and merchants and teachers and children who were not generals or senators or Jedi or clones. Those lives kept going. They adapted to the Empire the way ordinary lives adapt to large political changes, not with acceptance exactly, but with the practical negotiation of survival. What could be maintained? What had to be surrendered? What new routines replaced the old ones? The holonet changed. The content became more carefully curated. The news became a specific kind of news. The kind that told you what the Empire wanted you to know and did not tell you what it did not. People noticed the change and did not say they noticed, mostly. Some said it. Some of the people who said it loudly were not heard from again. The lesson was administered efficiently. Most people learned it. Life continued. It is always continuing. This is not comfort. It is just the fact of biological existence, that it persists through things that seem like they should stop it. Life continued. The war's shape remained in the galaxy, like the shape of a hand in cooling metal, present, preserving the exact form of the pressure that made it, outlasting the moment of impact by a generation or more. The clone troopers who survived into the Imperial period aged, visibly, quickly, in the way that a doubled clock doubles everything, including the external evidence of time's passage. Their hair went grey, their faces lined. The body that had been built for war began the slow process of wearing out. The joints, the eyes, the specific fatigue that came from a frame that had been pushed hard through 3 years of combat and was now running out of the reserves that sustained it. Some of them were still in service when the aging became undeniable, when the face under the helmet was visibly an old man's face, when the physical standards that the Imperial Army required could no longer be met without accommodation. The Empire did not accommodate. They were processed out. Given what the bureaucracy designated as appropriate separation benefits, released into a galaxy that had no particular infrastructure for old soldiers who had been grown rather than born and had no families and no homeworld and no documents that established them as citizens in any conventional sense. They were released, they managed, some of them found each other. This is the part the official record does not contain. The informal networks, the quiet communities, the clone troopers who located brothers through means that the Empire did not track because the Empire had stopped considering them strategically relevant. They found each other. They recognized each other's faces, which was easy, and learned each other's specific differences, which took longer but was worth the time. They were old men telling each other's stories. They had very good memories. They had been trained to have very good memories. They remembered everything. Rex remembered everything. He was on Selos when the war caught up with him again, in the form of a crew on a broken ship, a Jedi survivor, a Mandalorian, a Lasat, a Lothali human teenager who reminded him slightly of no one he could specifically name and slightly of everyone he had ever fought beside. He was an old man by then, not old as the galaxy counted, but old as his biology counted, which was the only accounting that mattered to his body. He was living in a modified ATTE on a flat world with 2 other old clones, fishing for dupers, maintaining equipment that still worked because he had always been thorough about maintenance. He had not stopped saying his name. In 20 years of this life, of this quiet, marginal, deliberately invisible existence, he had introduced himself as Rex to every person he had met. Every one. It was still an act of defiance. It was still quiet. He still did not know anyone noticed. He still had the 3rd name. He had never spoken it aloud. He had carried it every day since the night on the transport after Kamino. When he had decided what it was and confirmed it fit, it still fit. He was old and it still fit. And this felt, in some way, he could not fully articulate, like something worth noting. Ahsoka came back. Not to the Order. The Order did not exist to return to. Not to the Republic. Not to any of the structures that had organized her life for its first 17 years. She came back to the fight. Differently. Under a different name. For a while. Fulcrum. The designation she used when she was part of the network Bail Organa had been building in the years since Alderaan. A name that described a function rather than a person. A name designed to be replaced by whoever came next. She worked. She helped people escape the Empire's worst intentions. She moved information and resources, and occasionally people through the gaps in Imperial control. She did this carefully and consistently, and without the kind of formal recognition that the war had given her. Because formal recognition was the opposite of survival. She was very good at this. The war had been thorough. She learned what had happened to Anakin. The narrator does not describe this moment in detail. It does not need to be described in detail. The narrator only notes, she learned. And that after she learned, she was very still for a very long time. And that when she stopped being still, she continued working. And that she never fully resolved what she had learned into something that fit cleanly inside her understanding of the man she had known. She kept both versions, the man from Christophsis and the name from Coruscant. And she did not try to make them into one thing. Some things do not collapse into one thing. She carried both. She kept moving. The Force carried all of it. This is not metaphor either. The Force carried the weight of the Clone Wars, the way the ground carries the weight of everything on it. Not with awareness, not with preference, simply with the structural fact of being the thing that everything rests on. Every death on every battlefield. Every decision in every meditation hall that was no longer full. Every clone's 3rd name. Every moment Rex pressed his palm to the ground. Every stone in CT-4774's pockets. Every boot on every surface. Durasteel and stone and jungle floor and desert and ice in the corridors of the Jedi Temple on a morning that turned wrong. The Force carried all of it. Without judgment. Without explanation. Without the comfort of suggesting that any of it was necessary or meaningful. Or building towards something worth what it cost. The Force carried it simply because the Force carried everything. This was its nature, not kindness, not indifference, just presence. The same quiet presence it had always been, before the war and through the war and after, unchanged by what had happened inside it, the way deep water is unchanged by what happens on its surface. Years after the war, Ahsoka stood on a world she was passing through. She did not know its name. She had passed through enough worlds that she did not always catch the name before she moved on. They became a texture rather than a list, the accumulated sensory record of a life lived in transit. This one was green. That was the first fact her body registered. After years of urban corridors and dusty outer rim landings and the grey metal smell of ships, this world was green in the specific way that worlds with healthy growing things are green, layered, deep. The green of something that has been growing for a long time without interruption. She stopped. She did not have a mission here. She was between things. She stepped off the path she had been walking and moved into the tree line, not far, just far enough to be in it rather than beside it. She stopped in front of a tree, old, wide, the bark rough and ridged in the way that very old bark becomes, not damage, just time. Just the record of seasons and growth and the slow, patient expansion of a thing that had been given enough time. She pressed her palm against it, not for a reason, not because the mission required it or the situation demanded it, or because anyone was watching and the gesture would communicate something, just to feel something solid, just to press her hand against something that had been here long before the war and would be here long after, and to feel the specific quality of that continuity under her palm. The bark was rough, cool in the shade, solid in the absolute sense, the solidity of something with deep roots, something that the surface disturbances of the world above had not reached. She felt the Force. It was there. Of course it was there. It was always there. She had spent years in the war discovering that the Force did not leave, that it stayed through everything, constant and quiet, carrying everything without being changed by what it carried. It was there under her palm, in the tree, in the roots, in the soil below the roots and the water below the soil. The same Force that had been in the Jedi Temple's meditation hall when it was full. The same Force that had been on Geonosis when CT-1477 pressed his face into the red sand. The same Force that had run through the tunnels of Mandalore and the corridors of the Chancellor's office and the field on Umbara and the slave processing facility on Kadavo. The same Force, unchanged, still carrying all of it, still not explaining any of it. She stood there for a while. The tree did not move. The Force did not speak. She did not ask it to. She just stood and felt the solidity and let it be enough. After a while, it was enough. Not resolution, not peace in the way the Jedi Code had described peace, as an absence of disturbance, as a state achieved through discipline and surrender and the correct relationship to attachment. Just enough. The practical kind of enough. The kind that lets you lift your hand and turn around and walk back to the path. She lifted her hand. She turned around. She walked back to the path. Somewhere in the galaxy, the narrator does not specify the world because the world does not matter. Because this happened on many worlds, in many margins, in many of the quiet places that the Empire's attention did not reach. A clone trooper was dying. Not dramatically. The way old men die when they have been old for a while and their body has simply run to the end of what it was given. He was alone. Not unhappily alone. He had been alone enough in his life that the aloneness had become a texture rather than an absence. Something he moved through rather than something missing. He was thinking in the way that people think in the last period, not linearly, not with the focused attention that tasks require, but with the slow, associative drift of a mind releasing its grip on the work of maintaining itself. He was thinking about Kamino, the rain, the grey ocean, the smell of the training facility. He was thinking about the game without a name, about the brother who was terrible at wrestling and unbothered by it, about the sound of boots in the corridor going still when the deployment order came. He was thinking about his brothers. He was thinking about his third name. He had carried it for his entire adult life, which was not as long as it should have been, which was never as long as it should have been. He had carried it through Geonosis and through the campaigns that followed, and through Order 66 and through the years after, through the Empire and the margins and the quiet places. He had never said it aloud, not once. He had kept it perfectly in the private place where it lived, the place no system could log, no chip could access, no Imperial record could find. He kept it now, in the last minutes. He set it inside, once more, to confirm it still fit. It still fit. He kept it. He took it with him. The narrator admits this openly. The third name is gone. Not the concept. The concept is documented in the accounts of clone troopers who survived long enough to tell their stories, in the informal records that Ahsoka and Rex and a few others preserved, because they understood that the records mattered even when the systems did not require them. The concept survived. But this specific name, the one this specific man chose in a training yard on Kamino, the one he pressed flat against his chest and carried through everything, that name is gone. The narrator cannot recover it. The narrator does not try to fill the gap with something plausible, something constructed, something that would satisfy the need for completion. The gap stays. It is supposed to stay. The third name belonged to him. It was the only thing that ever fully belonged to him. Not his face, which was shared. Not his designation, which was assigned. Not his skills, which were trained. Not his body, which was grown and used and spent. Only the name. Only the private word that he chose and kept and spoke inside and carried to the end. It was his. It went with him. The narrator says, this is the only kind of silence that is completely honest. Not the silence of omission. Not the silence of destruction, of a record burned, or a name erased by a system that wanted it gone. The silence of belonging. The silence of a thing that was so fully someone's that when they left, it went with them rather than remaining behind to be found and catalogued and entered into a record that was not designed for it. He kept it. It kept him. In whatever way something can keep a person. In the small daily act of being known to oneself, of carrying a word that only you have heard, of being, in this one small private interior way, entirely your own. He kept it. He is gone. The name is gone with him. The boots have stopped. This is what the narrator has been tracking since Geonosis, since a transport lifted from red rock and vibration moved through durasteel under a clone's palm, and an army that did not know what it was going toward moved through the dark toward everything that waited. The boots have stopped. Not all of them. Not everywhere. The galaxy is still full of people moving through it, still full of the sound of steps on every surface, durasteel and stone and jungle floor and bark and desert sand. But these specific boots, the ones this story followed, CT-1477, face down in the red sand, his boots still. CT-4774, in the canyon on Ryloth, his pockets full. The boots in the Jedi temple corridor, going suddenly still when the deployment order came, then moving fast toward the transports. Mace Windu's boots on Ryloth, on ground that was free now. And the specific way he stood after, not celebrating, just standing. Ahsoka's boots on the temple stone, walking toward the doorway, making a sound that did not echo back. Rex's boots on Mandalore's durasteel, the sound sharp and specific, and then finally, still. The boots on the battlefield that no one is coming back to, still. The durasteel is quiet. The field in the outer rim is quiet. The training corridors of Kamino are quiet, repurposed now, the facility running different work, the floors that 1,000 men marched through scrubbed and reassigned. The Jedi Temple is quiet in the specific way of a building that has been converted. Not empty, but wrong. Full of the wrong activity, the amber light still coming in through the windows, falling on floors that do not remember what they carried. The Chancellor's office is quiet, rebuilt, restored, the window replaced, no evidence remaining of what happened there. Mandalore is quiet in the aftermath of its siege, recovering or trying to, the way occupied places try. Dagobah is quiet. It has always been quiet. It will be quiet for a while longer. Tatooine is quiet. The desert is always quiet. The boy on the moisture farm does not know yet what he carries. The galaxy kept going. It kept going the way it always kept going, with the specific indifference of a system too large to grieve, too complex to pause, too full of ordinary life to stop for the weight of what had happened inside it. Stars turned. Hyperspace routes stayed open. Children were born on worlds that had been battlefields. The children grew up knowing the war as history rather than experience, as something that had happened before them, that explained the shape of the world they inherited without being something they had lived inside. They learned about it in schools that taught the Empire's version. Some of them, later, would learn other versions. Some of them would be part of what changed it. Not yet. But the galaxy kept going. And in the keeping going, in the ordinary persistence of biological existence across 100,000 worlds, in the meals eaten and the sleep taken and the small decisions made by people who were not generals or senators or Jedi. In all of that, something survived. Not the Republic, not the Order, not the specific institutions that had claimed to carry the galaxy's best values and had, in different ways and at different speeds, failed to. Something older than those institutions. Something that had been there before the first Senate session and the first Jedi Council and the first clone decanted in a Kamino tank. The thing that Ahsoka felt under her palm against the bark of a tree. The thing Rex carried in a name no system logged. The thing the Force was still conducting, quietly, through everything. Still present, still carrying, still the same quiet it had always been. This is where the record ends. Not because there is nothing more. There is always more. The galaxy always has more. History does not stop at the convenient point. But because this is as far as the narrator can honestly go, to the quiet, to the weight of it, to the shape of what was lost and what survived, and the long, complicated distance between those two things. The record ends here. The third name is gone. The boots are still. The Durasteel is quiet. And somewhere, underneath all of it, underneath the ash and the silence and the enormous accumulated weight of 3 years that remade a galaxy, the Force. Still there, still carrying everything, still asking nothing in return. This is the Clone Wars. Not the victory, not the defeat, the weight of it. Left here with you, in the dark, as it should be.